Hello everyone and welcome. Good afternoon if you're watching from India, good morning if you're watching from Europe, and good what are you doing at this time of day if you're watching from the US. But here we are and welcome for round afternoon if you're watching from India. 1 second, sorry, I can hear myself and I don't like being able to hear myself. So let me just close a couple of windows. Okay. So here we are for round 8 of the first SOA International Grandmasters Chess Festival. We are following Ellen Nilsson, WFM and WIM elect Ellen Nilsson's progress in this tournament, which has been very, very impressive so far, if I say so myself, which I can say because I'm not Ellen. But yes, welcome to the broadcast. To those of you in chat, the real Zeldor I saw, Matt is here, and Giant Pixels, thank you very much for the 6-month resub. It's been a pleasure having you in our community. So for a brief recap of how the tournament has been going, we have some commands which will give us a summary. So Ellen is on 4 out of 7. Well, we should have some commands. There we go. She's on 4 out of 7. She's gained a fair bit of rating from these games because she has been playing some very tough opponents. She started off by beating an IM in round 1, then she went one better and beat a GM in round 2, which was an incredible performance. Then the next day was a double round, and unfortunately it didn't go her way. So she, in the first game of the double rounds in round 3, unfortunately she just got she was worse off from the opening and it never got better. That was against an IM, and then as a reward in the second game she played an even higher rated IM, and then she was outplaying him. She was completely winning. Well, okay, maybe that's a bit harsh, but she was winning, and maybe, as Akjit said, a few moves away from securing the win, but when she blundered she allowed a tactic, and then the IM turned things around to win round 4. So then round 5 and round 6 she was down paired against some lower rated players. She won both of those games, which gave her the right to face a second GM in round 7, GM Adham Fauzi from Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, and she played pretty much a flawless game all the way throughout. And then as they got into time trouble, when they had just minutes left on their clock, unfortunately she dropped a pawn. There was a sneaky pin which was easy to miss, and then once she dropped the pawn, the position fell apart and the GM won. So yeah, very, very close to securing what would have been really a GM draw in the previous round, and so she could very easily have been on 5.5 out of 7, but still 4 out of 7 is a very respectable score at this stage, if you ask me. And welcome Vlad, good to see you here as well. But anyway, that's a quick recap of how the tournament's been going. So now we have a game on our hands today, round 8, which is underway, but I've been procrastinating a bit because once we get to the actual chess, I won't have very much to say. So we'll just say, you might be wondering what these pictures below me are. So we had been hoping to have a live video feed from the playing hall, but unfortunately it wasn't able to we weren't able to make that happen. And so, modern problems call for modern solutions. So I asked some AI image generators to generate pictures of Danish players playing chess tournaments in India. And so what you see below are the results of that search. So we can pretend that that's a video with a terrible frame rate of our tournament from Bhubaneswar in India. But okay, the game is underway. We've had a few moves, so let's look at the opening. So today, I should say who's playing. So Ellen is playing with white, as you can see, and her opponent is Gaurav Kumar. He's playing with the black pieces. So he is 1953 rated, but don't be fooled by that rating because he's actually a very strong player. So he was over 2300 in 2017, I think. So he could have claimed the FM title, but he hasn't. For reasons unknown to us. But yeah, so he has kind of dropped a bit since then. Of course, he was quite a bit younger then. Probably, I would imagine he had the K factor 40, which makes it easier to fluctuate. But now, kind of in this post-pandemic phase, he has been getting active again and gaining rating. So if I'm not mistaken, in the last 2 months, he's played over 40 classical games and gained a fair bit of rating in that period. So although he's 1953, this is from the January list. In February, he's already 1980 or thereabouts. And he's obviously been having a good tournament here as well. So if you would like to find out more about our opponent, you can check out his stats with this command here. Yes, the AI is I don't know if they're playing some very crazy form of Bughouse or something like that, but this is obviously not the AI which beat Kasparov, let alone the one that powers Stockfish. But okay, let's have a look at the opening. Enough waffling from me. So d4 is, of course, the opening which Ellen has traditionally favored. She has lately been playing some more e4 games, but d4 is her first love when it comes to chess. And it is the opening she used to beat the GM in round 2, so if it ain't broke, why fix it? And we got this standard Queen's Gambit decline so far, and the exchange variation, and apparently this is the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation, positional variation. So Ellen, pinning the knight to the queen, getting that bishop out, and you want to get that bishop out before you close the pawn chain, because otherwise it would be trapped at home and not doing very much. Okay, so that's the current position as far as I can see. And yeah, we can see Ellen playing very quickly, so I guess this is along the lines of what she was expecting. The opponent, meanwhile, has taken a fair bit of time in what is a very standard opening. So that's a bit of a surprise, because I think if you're prepping against Ellen, you would be expecting d4. Although maybe her recent forays with 1e4 are paying dividends in making her harder to prep against. But yes, another Carlsbad is what we'd expect to see. So the Carlsbad pawn structure, you get these opposing pawn chains in opposite directions. It's a very solid, stable position, and yeah, it makes for a lot of maneuvering through the middle game. So not the sharpest of openings, but yeah. Welcome here for Chess Today. Good to see you join the channel. Okay, see you in a few hours, Vlad. Hopefully by the time you come back, the stream would have ended. Not because we don't want you here, but because Ellen would have won already. But yes, we are hoping for a win for Ellen. She is, of course, the rating favorite, but as we said before, that rating is a bit misleading. Her opponent has a higher peak rating than Ellen has had. So certainly a strong opponent and will take some beating, but Ellen is certainly capable of that. And indeed, the time control is 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment, and there's no additional time control after 40 moves or anything like that. So apart from the increment that they get every move, what they start with is what they get. Yeah, which makes for some excitement as you get towards the kind of later stages of the middle game. The time pressure starts having its say, as we saw to our detriment in the previous round, where Ellen, with just a few minutes on her clock, started to go a bit wrong. And thank you very much, Giant Pixels, for the good luck. We will transmit that telepathically to our champion over in Bhubaneswar. Have a good gym session. Don't work out too hard so that you can come back quickly and join us. Or, just watch on the phone. And then, do 1 rep every time a move is made. That seems like a good pace for getting swole. So yes, and please do let me know if everything's okay with the stream, if the audio is at a good level, and things like that. If anything is wrong, I will try to fix it as best as I can. But yes. So we are having a bit of a wait here. So while we wait, let's just pop over to board 13, because I am seeing that there is already a result here, which is very surprising. Yeah, sorry about the echoing. I had the stream open in another tab just to set things up beforehand, and forgot to close it. Okay, so we have this is board 13, Bandevar Abhay, or I guess Abhay Bandevar versus Jay Kumar Shetty Samed and IM. And in this position, it says that black is victorious, which I don't understand. I will be honest with you. The engine says it's equal. So I presume, or I hope this is a DGT error. Or yeah, something's going on at the scenes. But yeah, this certainly does not look like a winning position for black. So, you know, either it's a DGT error and the game should be ongoing, or the only other thing I could think of is maybe that there was some incident with a phone or something like that, and so white got disqualified. But we'll maybe keep an eye on that and see if there's any update. And hello, my boy Magnus Giri. Great to have you join us as always. So yes, then it should be noted. So I haven't been following the overall standings of the tournament that closely, I have to admit. But I can see that the GM, which who Ellen beat in round 2, is playing on the top board. So he must be one of the tournament leaders, which just goes to show how strong Ellen is and how good her performance has been. So coming back to Ellen's game, we're still waiting for a response from our opponent. But I don't know, it's got to be heartening, I guess, when your opponent takes this long on move 5. And so I will say, in terms of the setup, so as the command says, I'm very far from a chess expert. I just play casually online, and so and certainly OTB I don't play competitively at all. So I'm going to use a bit of engine assistance, but I will try to limit how much we do. So I have the engine on for the evaluations. You can see the evaluation bar to the right of the board on the stream, but I don't have the lines on, so no move suggestions. So we can together, hopefully, I hope you'll help me out here. We can look at the position, we can try and find good moves, and then play around with the board to see if we got it right. And I do, at least for these opening stages, I do also have the Lichess Masters database open, so we can see what was played historically and what is recommended. And welcome Smart Sky. Always good to see a fellow Jesse Feb mod here, a fellow emoteless Jesse Feb mod. But very kind to have you join us as well. We were actually, okay, I suppose I should be forthright with you. We were meant to have Jesse on today for commentary, but again there was a bit of uncertainty over whether we'd be able to stream because we'd been hoping to have the videos and we don't. So she ended up having other plans, and so you're stuck with me. Indeed, maybe one day, but don't hold your breath, I think. But yes, so I saw, sorry Mas, I saw your question earlier and then I forgot to respond to it. So the question was on move 3. Okay, so here you have the Queen's Gambit, or okay, sorry, it's not a Queen's Gambit yet because d5 hasn't been played, but you're setting up for the Queen's Gambit. Black playing Knight f6 on move 1 gives them a bit more flexibility. So like kind of the standard Queen's Gambit, you have d5 and then you go with c4, and then you can transpose. So if you want to decline it, you go like this, here and here, and you kind of transpose to the same position we have on the board. But the only issue, or not the issue, but the maybe drawback of this move order is that playing d5 on move 1 is a bit committal. And so you're kind of pushing that pawn forward. And of course, one of the first lessons I learned from Ellen when she was streaming, is that when you push a pawn, you can't take it back. Okay, so that's quite a lot of commitment. So playing knight f6 first, as our opponent did, gives you a bit more flexibility. And for example, if you're going to face the London, instead, of course, Ellen would never play the London, but if that's what your opponent plays, then you have more options for how you want to respond. And so, for example, Min Le, in his anti-London repertoire, suggests playing c5 instead to challenge that central pawn from the get-go. But okay, so Matt's question was, here, once you reach this position, you want to then start developing your pieces, you want to develop your knights, and which one do you move? And both are completely fine, both are very playable. I see in the database, these are the top moves by far. So 47% of the time white goes for knight f3, and then 41% of the time it's knight b3, and then the other move to get any significant representation in the database is g3 to prepare for a fianchetto, and I believe that's setting up the Catalan. So yeah, I think when I play, I usually find that both of my knights end up on c3 and f3, so I play them somewhat interchangeably, and it doesn't make too much difference usually in my own games. But indeed, as Mas is saying, the reason why knight f3 is perhaps preferred is the Nimzo. So if you play knight c3, as Ellen did, kind of in the Nimzo, you play bishop b4, which pins the knight to the king. And I was reading up about this a bit earlier. Some advantages of doing this are, firstly, you make it impossible to play e4 in the current position, because that knight is pinned, so it cannot defend e4. And so that kind of negates a bit the central control of white's pawns. So that's kind of one reason for playing this. And then, of course, the other idea in this position, let's say something is played, is that you can exchange and then you double up the c-pawns here for white. But, you know, that's not so bad for white usually, from what I've seen, because even though you have these double pawns, you do get these central pawns. So you're moving one outside pawn into the center, and you get a bit more central control. But yes, so as here for chess today is saying, we have had a few more moves now, so let's stop analyzing things that didn't happen. So we got this exchange variation. Whoops, I jumped ahead too far. Ellen played her bishop out, and then the opponent kind of broke the pin with bishop e7. So a more conservative bishop move than you would see in the Nimzo we were just talking about. Ellen completes the pawn chain. Again, the point was to get the bishop out before you close the pawn chain. And then we see the development of the other knight here. So in these d4 games, and in particular in the Carlsbad structure, you usually do not want to develop your knight to c6, because you want to keep that square free for the pawn to be pushed. And you play the knight here instead. It supports this knight. And if you castle, bring the rook out, then the knight could hop to f8, where it defends this pawn here against some mating threats. So Ellen does bring out the bishop to its most active diagonal. And we see actually knight f8 already, with the ideas perhaps of, but definitely of rerouting the knight, I would presume, to g6, so that you keep this open for the bishop. Ellen brings her knight out to g2. Okay, so I was wrong. So it comes to e6 with the idea of putting pressure on this bishop immediately. So Ellen pulls the bishop back, and we are now at the current position. So this is quite a bit rarer in terms of the database. So there have been 34 games in this position. The good news for us as Ellen fans is that the majority of them, well, not the majority, but 44% of them have been won by white, 32% draws, and 24% black wins. Okay, so it's looking good so far for white. And indeed, in the top games, like the 5 top games in terms of the ratings of the players, we have 3 white wins and 2 draws. So history is on our side at least. f3. That could perhaps come into play at some point if you want to go for a central pawn break. But yeah, and also it gives you some room to retreat the bishop once it is further pressured. Yeah, so not now, but at some point certainly. So in the Carlsbad structure, so if black completes this here, there are a couple ideas for white. So the two kind of main ideas for white. Okay, let me actually switch scenes. Okay, so we lose our playing hall video, but we have the live board down below me, and then we can play around a bit on the analysis board. So in the Carlsbad structure, black wants to complete this pawn chain here, white has this pawn chain here, and so what is often said is that that the pawn chain indicates what direction you want to be attacking. So with the black pawn chain pointing towards the king side, that means black play will be towards attacking the king side, where white will usually castle. With the white pawns pointing towards the queen side, that means white's play will be more on the queen side. And hello NTT, good to have you here as well. So kind of the two main attacking ideas for white in the Carlsbad. The first is the minority attack. That here you have the minority on the queen side, white has 2 pawns, black has these 4 pawns in the chain. So you throw the pawns forward to disrupt this pawn structure and make these pawns weak and make more space for your pieces to be attacking. The other idea for white is to go for this central pawn break, which was suggested by Maz, that you want to push e4 at some point, challenge d5, and then like right now we can see black has some good control over the e4 square, so you may want to support it with f3 to begin with. And if you're castling, you have your rook on the f-file, then playing f3 and opening up the f-file might not be too much of a bad idea. You do just want to make sure that that diagonal doesn't get too weak, but while you have the dark square bishop, you maybe don't have to worry about that too much. But okay, so we have another move, so let's go back to the live position. And we have g6 here, which is interesting. So if you go back to the database, in this position, as I said, there have been 34 games, and by far the most common move for black was to castle. That happened in 21 of those games. And g6 has been played before, but it's only been played 5 times. But yeah, black actually does quite well with g6, according to the database. So I guess there are some tricks afoot. It feels a bit unnatural to me, because normally if you see g6, the idea is to fianchetto, but of course the bishop is already on e7, so that's not going to be happening. So it just seems like it maybe weakens this knight a bit, but I guess maybe the point is to perhaps to kind of reroute this knight. You could maybe come here, and then take away the squares for that bishop, and maybe provide some support to this bishop here. Otherwise you could maybe go here and then bring the bishop out there to challenge this diagonal. So usually in the Carlsbad, white's strong bishop is the light square bishop, because the pawn chain is on the dark squares, whereas the dark squared bishop is a bit weaker for those reasons. It gets obstructed by its own pawns. So often white is happy to trade off the dark squared bishop and wants to keep the light squared bishop. So I guess g6 is kind of limiting the scope of this strong piece of white's. But yeah, not something I would have expected to see in this position. And Ellen also took a bit of time to respond, so maybe she was also not expecting that either. But now she has castled, which feels like a pretty normal move. Yeah, that's a very good point. So normally, you know, the opening principle is that you shouldn't move your pieces twice in the opening. And so if the idea was to kind of reroute this knight somehow, then it's certainly been on quite the journey. It'll have been like this at least, so that's 4 moves, and then either the bishop comes out, or if the knight comes out, that would be a 5th move. So yeah, not. But then I suppose the counterpoint to that is that most of the pieces have been developed, and this bishop is on an open diagonal already, so like it's not so bad. But yeah, I'd expect black to maybe look to castle. But yeah, so looking again, this position appears thrice, and indeed the move that was played in 2 of those games was knight to g7. And then the other move was castling. And knight g7 is on the board, so well done us for understanding the idea behind g6. I suppose it wasn't that hard to predict, but we're going to take the small victories that we can. Okay, so any suggestions as to what white should play? Or how would you respond to this idea? Like, okay, what do we think black's idea is actually? Do we think that the bishop is coming out here? Or are we expecting the knight to come here? Or something else entirely? Not necessarily immediately, perhaps they will castle first. But yeah. Okay, so Magnus Giri is suggesting h3, g4, and queen c2. Mats is also giving another vote for queen c2. Indeed, queen c2. So if we are correct in assuming that the idea for black has been to gain control of the f5 square, they've moved the pawn to attack this square. The knight is or maybe not attacking but defending. So black has kind of 2 pieces, and with the bishop 3 pieces looking at f5. So that seems to be kind of where the current battle is going on. So yeah, it makes sense for white to maybe put a bit more pressure here. So yeah, you could do it with the pawns, but that does weaken the setup around your king somewhat. It wouldn't be without risk. Queen c2 would perhaps be a safer way of first getting about that. And then you also connect your rooks, so you give them a bit more freedom to move around. But yeah, and then if you do see something like the bishop coming out, you're maybe better placed to trade if you want to. Or I guess you also don't necessarily have to trade. Yeah, indeed. b4 does also appear in the database. And as we said before, okay, so we're not quite into Carlsbad yet because c6 hasn't been played, but one of the ideas in the Carlsbad is this minority attack. Now b4 does look a little peculiar because that would just be hanging. So let's try and understand how b4 would work. Okay, sorry, of course it's not hanging. Okay, let's so if you play b4, if our opponent were to be so kind as to take, then you have the fork. So you cannot actually take the pawn, which means that white can start pushing these pawns forward quite quickly to disrupt the queenside situation. So that's why b4 is a viable move, apparently. And then, indeed, in the other game in the database, at least on Lichess that I see, the move that was played was queen c2. So we'll have to wait and see what Ellen opts for. In the meantime, I realize I forgot to update the board command on YouTube. So let me go and do that. Give me 1 second. It's not the best kept secret in the world that I'm a big fan of Lichess, but I do wish that they made their broadcast URLs a bit more predictable. It would be convenient if you could know in advance what the URL for a board would be, so that you could set up your commands before the boards go live. Okay, and I'll also pin it in chat. Okay, so Magnus Guri says, if the bishop on c8 ever moves, white can try and take on f6 and go queen b3. It's a good point as well. So that is another thing in the Carlsbad. So you're talking about developing pieces, and as you can see, black has developed their bishop and their knight, this knight many times in fact. But that bishop has stayed at home, and one of the reasons you often delay the bishop's development is because it plays a role currently in defending the b7 pawn, which is often a weak point. So kind of the b and g pawns are often weak because they're only kind of defended by the bishops, and so if this bishop were to move, then if the queen comes out to b3, you are hitting 2 pawns at once. Yeah, I mean, it has its flaws. Everything does. But relatively speaking, it has fewer flaws than some other websites might have. Welcome, Chameleon Eyes. What are your options? We can help you out there, but we need to know what we're working with. In the meanwhile, Ellen has made a move, and it's a novelty. So we see our novelty on move 11, rook to c1. So taking advantage of the fact that white has this semi-open file, not obstructed by its own pawns, so it makes for perfect sense, and perhaps this is a bit like what Mats was suggesting, a bit of a waiting move just to see what black is going to do. Black meanwhile castles relatively quickly, moving their king to safety, and you can see lots and lots of pieces around the black king, nice pawn structure, and once this knight moves they'll have a bit of lift as well. Once this knight moves. So yeah, that's a very natural choice to be castling there for black. So far, everything calm and everything equal in this opening. There haven't been any big shocks, I wouldn't say. Piece of gum and a slice of cheese. Well, I start with the cheese, I suppose. I'm not sure how nutritious a piece of gum would be. You're welcome. Always happy to help. I may not be a very good chess player, but I'm very experienced when it comes to eating food. So I'm glad to get some questions about my area of expertise. I'll just have a quick look again at board 13 to see if there are any... Okay, and we are getting some moves on board 13 now. So it appears that was just a DGT error. The win it showed for black. So that game is very much underway, and in fact white has a decent position according to the engine against the much higher rated IM opponent. Am I Anish? No, I'm not Anish. I wish I was. He seems like a cool guy. But I am Screws, one of the mods on this channel. I felt like Groot when I said that. I am Screws, I am Groot. I don't think Ellen would ask me to do commentary though if that was the only thing I could say. Do I play much chess? Yes and no. So I don't play real chess, like over the board. I just play online for fun, and I do a lot more of that than I should. But yeah, as far as I can remember, it was my uncle who taught me how to play chess when we'd go visit when I was younger. But yeah, I'd play occasionally, but I never played in like a club or anything like that. And then I kind of left it for a long time. And then during the pandemic, when other sports kind of were on hold, chess was the only thing that, or not the only thing, but chess was still going on. So I got back into the game in terms of following it, and then started playing online a bit as well. So yeah. Very nice, Mats. Yeah, I should play more Rapid. I mostly play Blitz, just because I'm too slow to play Bullet well. So Blitz is more my time control, where it's fast enough that I don't feel too guilty about playing some Blitz in between a bit of work. But yeah, Rapid is where, or what I should play if I want to improve, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know what ghost trips are, Chameleon Eyes, so I cannot tell you whether I like them, or I suppose I can honestly say that I don't like them because I have no idea what they are. Okay, and Ellen goes for a very prophylactic move, King H1, which always feels like a very classy move. And I suppose perhaps this is an indication that she does want to go with the f3 push, and then just get that king off the diagonal preemptively to make sure that it doesn't kind of cause any difficulties later on. But yeah, again, maybe it's a bit of a waiting game. You know, they seem to be a bit coy here. You know, Ellen's developed her pieces. Okay, the queen hasn't moved yet, but perhaps, as Maz was suggesting, she wants to keep that option of queen b3 open if the bishop were to move. And then meanwhile, yeah, black also has kept their pieces at home. They've only kind of pushed two of their pawns forward. Maybe they're also keeping a bit of flexibility about whether they want to play c6 or c5. So yeah, my rating in Lichess Blitz, it's a 2000. The less said about my bullet rating, the better. And Rapid is about the same. A4, yeah, so we have kind of mentioned earlier that there is also this idea of launching the minority attack. One thing that should be noted though is that we no longer have the option of the b4 because black's king has castled, so we don't have that fork available. So it will be a bit slower for white to push those pawns. That's why quite often, rather than the rook c1 move, you see rook b1 to support the b pawn and enable this attack. So yeah, I mean, maybe rook c1 is a suggestion that Ellen isn't going to go for the minority attack just yet. I mean, also with c6 not having been played, it's maybe a bit questionable as to what exactly you'd be attacking, because with these pawns in a flat back 3, they're a bit harder to go after, I suppose. F4 is an interesting idea, but I think the problem with F4 is that you weaken a lot of your light squares. So you're putting all your pawns in dark squares there, you're losing control over the light squares, and it then becomes very hard to push E4, which I think would be maybe the more thematic pawn break. With F4, you also, this E3 pawn becomes a backward pawn, and it would probably be a target later on in the game, maybe even quite soon. You could allow this knight jump. So yeah, I think F4 probably is introducing a few too many weaknesses. But yeah, it is maybe tempting to go after this G6 pawn at some point to try and kind of disrupt the defense around the black king. But yeah, I don't think the current position calls for it. And hello, fly you fools. Pleasure as always to see you again. Very nice alliteration. I approve. Okay, and we do see c6. So finally, we are getting the Carlsbad pawn structure with the white and black, the opposing white and black pawn chains. So yeah, kind of very solid pawn structure. I guess it lends itself to more positional chess, as is common of the d4 openings. But yeah, I think the indications are that rather than the minority attack, Ellen is going for the central pawn break. She has these pieces in the center supporting such a break. But yes, maybe she'll have to think about what to do with that bishop as well. Whether she wants to keep it to put some pressure on this diagonal, although it's adequately defended for the time being, or whether she'd maybe like to pull it back where it can control a few more squares. I've never played Palworld, I don't even know how to pronounce it, nor have I actually seen anyone play it. So I've heard a bit of talk about it, it's been mentioned in a few Discord servers, so I gather it's a very popular game. And maybe loosely Pokemon themed. But yeah, I know very little about it, I'm afraid. Yeah. Yes, Fly You Fool. So as I was saying, we had initially been hoping to be able to stream this tournament with live video from the playing hall, but unfortunately that turned out to be rather difficult to set up. So to make up for the lack of video, I asked a few AI image generators to make some pictures of either Ellen or a Danish chess player, so on and so forth, playing chess in India. And so this is the result. So with a bit of imagination, we can pretend this is a live video with a very low frame rate from Bhubaneswar. And then occasionally when we get into some analysis of lines, I'll put a live board there instead. But yeah, this was actually my first time, I think, playing around with these AI image generators. It's certainly interesting technology. I wouldn't say I quite got what I was hoping for, but it's certainly better than anything I would have been able to draw in Paint. So I guess I have to give credit to the neural networks. Okay, so queen attack a5 or a4. Yeah. So the main question I'd have with that is, how do you bring the b pawn in support? Because yeah, the a pawn alone isn't going to do much good. It's not going to be able to get past there, and yeah, you can't bring the b pawn to b4 without it being captured here either. So unless Ellen can somehow, what's the word, provoke an exchange of the dark square bishops, it feels like she'd need to bring some piece to support b4. And the rook coming to c1 indicates that maybe she isn't planning to do that. I guess there are also some tactical ideas to look out for. So one question for black is, where do they develop their queen to? And if they were to put the queen on c7, then that could end up hanging this pawn, because let's play a move for white. And so if queen 7, we can see the eval bar shoots up, because Ellen could trade here, and then this pawn would be hanging because of the pin. So yes, that and this is also forking those pieces. I mean, the fork, of course, not very serious because the queen can go to defend the bishop, but the point being that you don't even need to give up the bishop pair in order to win this pawn. So yeah, one advantage of having the rook on c1 is it takes away one possible development square for the queen. But of course there are other options here. Queen d7 doesn't look as attractive because then you're just obstructing your own bishop, but perhaps if the bishop were to come out somewhere, then the queen could look to come to d7 instead. Okay, so Magnus Giri is suggesting that king h1, the idea behind that is to go knight g1, knight f3. Yeah, that's also makes a lot of sense, because with this pawn here, there's no other way to get to f3. But actually we just had a move in, which suggests that the answer is no. So Ellen does go for f3, so I think the idea is to go for this pawn break, and then you're opening up this g1 to a7 diagonal, so maybe you just want to get the, you just want to get the king off that diagonal, so there are no tactical ideas perhaps. Or rather, sorry, I guess this would be more of a threat in the future. Yeah, exactly. Queen b6 rather, because that could fork this pawn and the king if the king were still on g1. So of course, you know, professional players like Ellen and like amateurs like me, when they make moves, they look more than one ply ahead. So Ellen knew that she wanted to go for the central pawn break, and she saw that getting the king to a safer square in h1 was going to be useful. And of course there's no reason, or it wasn't forced to do it this early, but perhaps, as you say, with a bit of a waiting move, if it's a move that she wanted to play anyways, why not just play it now? And also f3 gives a bit more room for the dark squared bishop so that you can keep it on the board. As we said before, maybe in some lines, if the knight comes out to f5, then if the pawn were still on f2, the knight would always be able to trade off the be traded for the bishop, unless the bishop comes back to g5, but then of course it's vulnerable to attack. It's very kind of you to say, Chameleon Eyes. I appreciate it. I'm not sure how true it is, but that doesn't matter. I'll take the compliment anyways. So yeah, we see actually in the current position that Ellen is a bit down on the clock now. So she has been taking her time to consider some options. As we saw, this whole idea of fianchettoing the knight was a bit unusual. So it's maybe, even though she's got numerous games with 1d4 in her repertoire, this was perhaps something that caught her a bit by surprise. And so she, took some time to consider her options. But she is very familiar with the plans in the Carlsbad structure. So I think it was just a case of weighing up her options and seeing, what she wants to go for and how she wants to put those plans into action, rather than being a position where she wasn't sure what to do and needing to calculate on the fly. Yeah, I know that she is familiar with the structure because I took some lessons with Ellen on how to play the Queen's Gambit declined, and the Carlsbad structure was something we focused on. So that was very beneficial for me. Before that, I used to get into a terrible mess when my opponents would play d4 against me, and now I feel a lot more comfortable there. And I'll take this slight lull in the action for a bit of a plug. If you too would like to be taught how to play chess by Ellen, then she has recently released a Chessable course. So I should say that this course is geared towards beginners. People are just starting to play the game. So probably most of you in chat will be too advanced for the course. But it does still have some more advanced themes in there. But it is a very nice course, so do consider checking it out, especially if you know somebody who's looking to get into the game, if they want to take a bit of a shortcut and not spend or lose many games in trial and error to figuring out what to do, then the course is a great resource. I'll also have a quick look at what's going on the other boards of this tournament to see if there's any shock result, or I guess shock result unfolding that we should keep an eye on. But yeah, in the meanwhile, if anyone in chat has experience with playing in tournaments or is eager to get into it, please feel free to share. Yeah, if I lived in a country where chess was a bigger thing, then I would be tempted to maybe look into playing a tournament or so for fun. Yeah, I mean, you watch these streamers play their tournaments, and it looks very stressful, but also perhaps enjoyable. Okay, so quick look at the opening boards, or at the top boards rather, and it looks like everything is pretty calm, no major spikes in any evaluation bars. But yeah, if you are keeping an eye on the tournament, ooh, we have a celebrity in chat. Hello, Diana. I can imagine. But okay, very stressful, but also would it be fun? Or would you say it's worth it, I suppose? So if you don't know Diana, please do go give her a follow. The shout out is there in Twitch chat. Yeah, a wonderful streamer and WFM, if I'm not mistaken, from Ireland. And yes, Maz, indeed, it was a very on-point prediction from you. So yes, did you meet Ellen when you were at the Olympiad, Diana? So as we were saying, this tournament is taking place in India, in Bhubaneswar, and Ellen's last visit to India was for the Olympiad near Chennai, where personally she had a great tournament. So she earned one of the WIM norms that she needed in order to get the WIM title. So she's now applied for the WIM title, having collected, she in fact has 4 norms now, and she had achieved the rating, the 2200 she needed some years ago. So when the next FIDE Council takes place, which is probably sometime in March or April, Ellen's title will get an upgrade to the WIM. Okay, so at the European Chess Championships in Albania. Very nice. Okay, and we do see one of the moves you're expecting here. So bishop f5, again perhaps one of the point, or perhaps the point behind g6 having been played, is to support this bishop as it comes out here. And we see Ellen very quickly plays bishop f2, so that again was one of the reasons we were considering for playing this, because if we have a quick look, Ellen of course could have captured, but then black can recapture with the knight, and then that's putting pressure on f2, on the bishop immediately, and it's hitting this pawn, so you'd have to play bishop f2 anyways. So Ellen preemptively gets bishop f2 there and says that if you want to trade, you're going to trade on my terms, you're going to allow me to develop my queen. And as you said as well, as Magnus Giri was pointing out, with the bishop having left c8, that leaves the b7 pawn undefended for the time being. So there could potentially be ideas of playing queen b3, but you wouldn't be able to do that immediately because that bishop would be hanging. But even if you traded first, and even if this bishop weren't hanging, you would be hanging this pawn here. So that just wouldn't work. So bishop f2 makes sure that this pawn is defended. So now perhaps you could look to put pressure there, but instead black trades off the bishops immediately. And yeah, we have this position. So now the queen has been activated a bit. I mean, I'm not sure. Okay, this square is useful because it's supporting these central pawns. If you go for this break, then you want that queen to be in the midst of the action. But in terms of the diagonals, these light squares are very well controlled by black. So black has kind of a lot of light square control. Meanwhile, white is controlling some of the dark squares instead. And yet, with the light square bishops traded off, black can now complete their development with queen d7. As you were saying earlier, you don't want to develop to c7 because of some potential tactics there. Although now, at least, that pawn is defended. But yeah, d7 seems to make more sense. Yeah, that would be fun to watch. Which streamers have you played against OTB, Deanna? And when is your next OTB event going to be? And yeah, if you do enjoy following OTB tournaments, then definitely do give Deanna a follow, because she very often streams her tournaments with commentary as well. So that's always nice to be able to watch. Fiona and Tosh, I see. Very nice. Okay, that's not enough streamers for me to ask my follow-up question. It was to give us a tier list of the streamers you've played. It would be a bit cool to have to do that with only 2 streamers. Aha, very nice. Sehr gut. I think Maripant was playing in Ireland last week, if I'm not mistaken. You're welcome. Well spotted. That is indeed 1 year for Deanna. long-standing member of the community. Long-standing? Is that the right word? I'm not sure. Gonzaga, that's the one. I remembered there were some G's and some Z's, but I figured it wasn't Gorgonzola, so I didn't want to embarrass myself. But yeah, indeed, she had some strong opponents, I saw. Okay, so I wonder if... Okay, so I do think this is one of the ideas that Ellen is going for. I wonder, though, if this is the right time to play it. Let's see if it were played. Takes. I feel like this pawn is maybe... Okay, it's not that weak. It is quite well defended. This pawn as well is quite well defended. So you do get these pawns, but neither of them are kind of passed pawns. And then you do get open files, semi-open files for your rooks. And you could maybe look to start pushing to put some pressure on these pieces. But then on the other hand, you are weakening the g4 square, kind of in front of your king. So that maybe looks a bit unfortunate. Or unwise, rather. And thank you very much, Mas, for the 31-month resubscription. But yeah, okay, so we have the NS stamp of approval for this position. Okay, thanks for being here for the chess today, here for chess today, living up to the username. I hope you have a good rest of your day. And yeah, hopefully we will get a win. And yeah, if Ellen wins, then we should also be on a live board tomorrow. And then we'll have more commentary. 100% winning chances is very optimistic. That's what we like to see in chat. I as a mathematician, I'm not sure I can stand fully behind the 100% prediction, but certainly the winning chances should be quite positive. And Hex as well, with the resubscription for 40 months. These numbers just keep going up and up. So thank you, Hex, our newest moderator of the channel. Good to see you here as well. And you're from New Zealand, I see. Then it's quite understandable that you would call it a night. Have a good night. And yeah, hopefully see you tomorrow. That reminds me, the talk of New Zealand, that I should check how things are in the cricket. India 307 for 5. Australia cantering to victory against West Indies. But decent showing from India so far. Although perhaps not getting quite as many runs as they should have. Okay, but we have moves, so let's look at the moves. So Ellen went for this central pawn break that we were considering. So again, we're doing pretty well with predicting the moves, if I say so myself. Oh no, sorry, that didn't happen. I got ahead of myself. I got confused with the analysis and the live position. But yes, so knight a4 is the move Ellen went for. And yes, not as big a cricket fan as I used to be. It's been a bit harder to follow since I've moved abroad. But I did play a bit when I was in college, and I do like to watch it when I can. I see. Well, yes, it's I'm not even sure I can say it's quite late, Hex. It feels like it's quite early, but good to have you here. If you want, I can very quickly replay how we got to this position. So it was d4, went into a queen's gambit, declined, exchange variation, all fairly theoretical up to this point, and then the opponent went for this unusual g6 with the knight fianchetto maneuver. So this is when the game started slowing down a bit. A bit of an exchange of pieces, and now we've reached the current position. Yeah, good night here for chess today, and also Hex. If you're leaving right now, quite amusing. So if I'm not mistaken, Hex is from the Americas. So we have two viewers from opposite sides of the world going to bed together. By which I mean at the same time. But yes, kind of you to drop in. Yeah, chess players. Yeah, there was a discussion. Was it when Hannah was doing commentary yesterday? Or was it somewhere in Discord about kind of chess players being night owls? And I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that it's a hard set rule. I'm sure there are many chess players who are night owls, but I would also imagine there are many chess players who are early risers. But certainly, at least amongst the chess players you see on Twitch, many of them tend to stay up later than one should, perhaps. But of course, chess is more important than sleep, so you cannot question the commitment. But yeah, I agree with what was said in chat, that it does feel rather passive from black. As you can see, the pieces staying clustered around the black king, well inside their own half. But, having said that, usually it is white who is meant to take the initiative. And so yeah, so this maybe isn't too much of a surprise, especially when we consider the ratings in question. So Ellen on 2184, her opponent Gaurav Kumar on 1953. You do sense that black would be happy with the draw. In the sense that would be good for their rating. Ellen, meanwhile, will probably look to push for a win, given the opportunity. And hi, Eagle. Yes, of course. Being here to support Ellen is the worthiest cause of them all. So glad to have you join us. And if Ellen wants to go for a quick win, so that we can go to sleep at a reasonably normal hour, that wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't complain for sure. And yeah, I noticed that as well. When I was trying to set up for the stream, I was wondering if I'd gone to the wrong page. But if you go to the Lichess broadcast page, they now display the various broadcasts. Instead of just having the text titles in one column, they have this grid with images for certain broadcasts. Yeah, so nice to see that this is something they're working on. I know Ellen has often had some ideas about how the broadcast page could be improved for commentary, and I think some of the recent changes they've made have helped a lot. So for example, if you go to a broadcast like the broadcast for this tournament, and you go to the round page, the overview, you now not only see the little board previews of the different boards, but you can also see the evaluation bars there, like you used to be able to do in Chess 24. And so that makes it a lot easier to see where things might be getting quite exciting at a quick glance. And in fact, again, I remember something I forgot to respond to, but I think there was some discussion about board 3 being interesting. So maybe let's have a quick look at board 3 while we wait for Ellen to respond to rook e8. Yeah, that is true. So now they have this overview page, and you have to do one more click to get to the boards. I'm not quite sure why they introduced that, but perhaps there will be some features added, or perhaps that's a change that they can revert at some point. So okay, indeed, in board 3, we have GM Diptayan Ghosh versus IM Arash Tabaz. And we seem to have a fairly decisive position in favor of white 20 moves into the game. So maybe let's just have a quick look at how this game transpired. So we see a very symmetric position, but then white breaks the symmetry with some aggressive pawn pushes in the center. So I mean, this almost ends up in I guess this is a King's Indian defense against Queen's Gambit somehow. We saw an exchange of queens. So a lot of pieces traded off. And then okay, this pawn getting quite far up the board. And this was quite a misstep from black, it seems. Because you're just weakening the pawns here. And we're going to see a capture here, or no, not a capture in fact, just a straight push forward. And this makes sense because the promotion square now is black, or dark rather, and so the dark square bishop can make sure that any rook which goes to block the pawn gets kicked away, and you can bring your other rook to the file to support the pawn, and that's indeed what happened here. And this is the current position. So, you know, pinning the bishop to this rook, so that if you do try to push it away, you could remove the defender of this pawn. So white puts the rook on the square where it's defended by the pawn instead, to enable this, so that black cannot deflect this rook by exchanging the b-file rooks. Okay, so thank you for the tip. I forget who it was who suggested this. But yeah, no, I mean, so I think, Magnus Giri, that the idea here is probably, I mean, unless I'm missing something, if you play bishop a5, right, then you're putting pressure on this rook, so the rook would have to move. Then you exchange on b8, and you can push this ahead. And so that's why rook b5 is played, to take away this move. Also makes sense, and then perhaps you could look to challenge on the d-file here. But yeah, certainly an uncomfortable position for black. We see their pieces look quite uncoordinated. So yeah, and certainly you would expect a 2568 rated GM to convert a +4 position. So a reasonably quick result coming in on board 3, it seems. I'm not sure actually what the scores are at the top of the standings. When I checked after round 5, I know there are some players on 4.5 out of 5. So yeah. Okay, but let's go back to our game of the day. Ellen Nilsson versus Gaurav Kumar. We have not had any moves yet. So I'm going to take a short break now. We've been going for over an hour. So I'll take a short break and I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, and welcome back. Although I suppose you've been here and I'm the one who's come back. But yeah, thank you, Magnus Geary, for the update on the standings. So the tournament leaders on 6 out of 7, and then the chasing pack on 5.5, and a fair bit more, just another point behind. So Ellen, on 4 out of 7, is not too far away. It's okay, she's 2 points behind the leader, but, not so far from the chasing pack. I think there are prizes for the top 20, and also some prizes for like the top woman, and some rating categories and age groups as well, if I'm not mistaken. There is quite a lot of prize money in this tournament. You can find out more if you go to the Lichess broadcast and go to the chess results page, and then there's a link, or to the official website, and then they have a link with all the details of the tournament. But I see we had some moves, some action took place. So this is where we left off. Rook e8 was played. Of course, black has this semi-open file as well, so it makes sense that they would want to claim it. As we said, the e3 pawn has the potential to be a somewhat backwards pawn since it's not supported by any other pawns. So it's a bit of a weak... It is kind of the base of this... Well, I don't know if 2 pawns make a chain, but it's the base of this pawn structure. So it is a target for black, and the rook there could exert some pressure. Ellen had played the knight to a4 on her previous move, with the idea that we see here of bringing it to c5, where of course attacks the queen, so something needs to be done about this, and black chose to trade off the bishop for the knight, and Ellen captured with the pawn. And so she's now setting up a 3 versus 4 here on the queen side, and then a 4 versus 3 on the king side. And yeah, so now with the dark squared bishop being gone, Ellen does have this option now of pushing for the queenside pawns and to try to disrupt this pawn chain that black has and create some weaknesses in the black camp. And then perhaps at some point you could unleash the bishop along the dark squared diagonal there. And yeah, of course, taking with the pawn makes sense. The other option would have been to take with the rook, but then that rook is out of place. It doesn't have very many squares to go to, and it's quite easily kicked away, so you'd lose a tempo or two there. So yeah, it looks like as I think maybe Mas had said earlier, a long game in store for us. Everything even Stevens up to this point, and yeah, setting the stage for the battle to come. So there are quite a few imbalances in the position we mentioned before. The pawn majority for black on the queen side, for white on the king side, and now also in terms of the minor pieces, black has 2 knights, white has a bishop and a knight. So usually the knight pair, so you'll hear a lot about the strength of the bishop pair, because together the bishops can control all the squares. One bishop alone, of course, only controls half of the squares, or can move to half of the squares, I should say. So a bishop pair works well in unison, a knight pair less so. So I've often heard it said that kind of when you have 2 knights, they just get in each other's way. Okay, so knights, of course, they can defend each other, but then that's quite an unstable configuration, because when you move a knight away, then it can no longer move to another, when you kick a knight away, it can no longer move to a square where it still defends the other knight. So they're not as well coordinated. So like a bishop pair is more than the sum of its parts, a knight pair perhaps less than. So it might be to Ellen's advantage to have the bishop instead, but kind of the problem is that it's the dark squared bishop. Black has their pawns on light squares here, so only one pawn is on a dark square, which means that these pawns can never be attacked by this bishop. And meanwhile, Ellen's pawns will more naturally end up on dark squares in the opposing chain, and then they will kind of restrict the range of this bishop. So it's maybe not the strongest bishop in the world, but you know, she could have some ideas of bringing it into the black camp at some point, where it could be quite well supported by her pawns. I'm also curious to see how Ellen's opponent from yesterday is doing. So let's have a quick look at his game. So Ellen played the GM Adham Fauzi, who they had a very equal game for the vast majority of the game, but then he tricked her in the end game in time pressure, or I guess the late middle game, shall we say, and went on to win. So today he's playing FM Ayush Sharma, and we see a French, the advanced variation. Oh, that's a very nice tactic from black. I see. So spotting this fork, and so giving up the piece to make that fork happen. Of course, you could not try to take a pawn on the way, because then the queen takes, and that square is defended. So black wins an exchange, but the evaluation is still pretty close to 0. And I guess the reason being that now the white king is stuck in the center where it's quite exposed. This pawn, this bishop is pinned for the time being. Maybe that pawn is weak, and indeed it's captured. And this is the current position. So yeah, so an exchange for a pawn, an exchange and a pawn for black, but white has compensation, it would appear, given that the engine is not raving about this position for black. And I wonder if you can, but yeah, I guess the point being that, so you could maybe win a pawn here, but you would lose this pawn. And also, since the king is exposed, black probably wants to keep the pawns on, keep the queens on the board, so that they have material to attack with. Oh, okay, and that is surely a DGT error. I don't think there's any tactic at play where this makes sense, and indeed the board is corrected. So black does go for the extra pawn, invalidating what I just said. But okay. So we have a move from Ellen's game. So let's go back. So after the exchange, black goes here. Sensible move. You're looking at 2 pawns. Of course, this pawn is currently adequately defended, but that means you're maybe tying the bishop down to the defense of this pawn for the time being, as we said before. Maybe there were some ideas of this at some point, but that can't currently be played. So we'll maybe see rook f to e1. At some point. That was a move I think Maz had suggested as a waiting move earlier, but it maybe makes sense to defend this pawn, the f3 pawn of course being adequately defended. Yeah, that's a good point, Magnus Giri, that you do. Black does have one piece which is yet to be brought into the action. And it makes sense to bring it towards the d-file where the queen is, and maybe there are some ideas of white opening things up here, so you want to kind of nip those in the bud, but indeed you're maybe looking at some pins of this knight then, if you allow that, and you would have to defend the knight. So yeah. There we go. So yeah, interesting. And I suppose with the queen staying on the 7th rank, you keep the b7 pawn protected. I wonder if Ellen is going to just start pushing these pawns. Because then, yeah, you add some support to the pawn here. So you're not relying on defending it with the rook. And yeah, I think you need to activate the knight on e2 to move it somewhere. And perhaps, I don't know, does g3 make sense where it can defend this? I mean, you don't want to go to, or you can't go to c3 now because you would hang that pawn. But if g3, and then maybe that can support a push. So something like g3, knight g3, rook fe1, and then you're maybe in position to start pushing this. Although, yeah, you maybe have to look out for rook d8. So instead, Ellen goes here, putting some pressure on the backwards pawn, but I guess obstructing her own pawns from pushing forward. But yeah, so maybe tying down the queen to the 7th rank. And then yeah, if black looks to defend with rook a to b8, then you could start kicking that knight away. That's kicking the rook away at some point by playing bishop to g3. And one thing we have liked in this tournament is that Ellen is playing. She's playing very well on the clock. So she's often made her moves quite quickly, and she's generally been at least equal with her opponent, if not better, on the clock. So of course, when she played against the GM in the previous round, and she in fact had the time advantage until quite deep in the game. So she's not letting herself get too pressured with respect to time, and still finding very good moves, despite playing quite fast. Yeah, so one rule they say, like I guess especially when you're in a position like this, where there don't seem to be kind of many tactics on the board, so you have to play a bit more positionally. So then you have to kind of identify what your worst piece is, and then see where you want to, where it would be better placed. So actually, I suppose I should do a bit more promotion for my boss. So is this the command? This is the command. Ellen has started recently, like with the launch of her Chessable course. She's launched, or she started a series of chess tips for improvers, which you can find on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can just go to her shorts. You can also find it on TikTok or on Instagram, on her Ellen's Chess Instagram account. And yeah, so she gives a lot of tips for things you should look to improve. And one of the tips is about kind of making sure pieces are active and fulfilling some function. And so I remember when Code Chess was a thing, there was a group lesson, and Max Warmerdam, the Dutch GM, gave a lesson, and his lesson was about kind of in the middle game, identifying where your pieces should be. So look at your pieces, identify which of your pieces is the worst piece in the sense that it's doing nothing, and then look for where it would be best placed, and then figure out how to get there. So yeah, I guess if we try to apply that to this position, I would say that Ellen's minor pieces are perhaps both competing for the title of... Okay, I don't want to say they're the worst piece, but they're not doing so much. Now the bishop is playing an important role in defending this pawn currently, so it gets the edge over the knight. And the knight right now is deep in its own territory, It's close to the edge of the board, so it doesn't see as many squares as it can. So that's certainly a piece you want to develop. And I would guess, or I would imagine, that perhaps playing it to d4. Then it would start taking away some squares from the enemy camp. And eventually, you would very much like to put your knight here, I think, where it's really hitting a lot of squares around the black pieces, and this would be an outpost for the knight because there are no pawns that can challenge it. But the question is, how do you get there? Because kind of all the squares you can get to that square from are being controlled by the black pawns. So in order to make that happen, you'd maybe need to go for a central pawn break, trade off these pawns, and then get in like that. So yeah, maybe tough to get there, but maybe here for the time being. And hello Captain Ketchup and Heir Apparent, great to see you, as always. I think I've said that for many people who have joined, but I do want you to know that it is sincere. It's not just a reflex greeting. Congratulations on Australia's win today, Heir Apparent. It seemed like quite the comprehensive victory. And Captain Ketchup, I am not at liberty to disclose the remuneration I receive for these commentary duties, but I will say that it's a very fair salary given the quality of commentary being provided. So I have no complaints on that front. And let me just check. Ooh. Yeah, India, I was just checking the score here, and they finished on 336 for 6. Jaiswal with a monster century so far. So yeah, I mean, good score, but it's all come, or essentially all come from Jaiswal. So a bit disappointing that he didn't get more support from his fellow batters on what was said to be a good batting pitch. So yeah, we know England can be explosive with their batting. So hopefully India can add a few more runs. But yeah, without Jadeja as well, that becomes a bit tougher. Less than 5 figures, I'm afraid to say. Now you're making me wonder if I've undersold myself. Undersold? Undervalued. Yeah, that first test was, well, okay, it was very exciting, and it would be boring if India won every test they played at home. And at least the upset came in the first test of the series, so India has some time to respond. Although, yeah, the absences of some key players like Kohli and Jadeja now and Rahul not helping. It's a coconut. So it's coconut water. Still water. Okay. And at the same time, Black was maybe playing the same game. They said, well, what is this knight doing on g7? So in fact, g7, g2, b2, b7, those are called dumb squares for the knight because they're very close to the edge of the board. So again, the knight doesn't have many squares to move to. And okay, this doesn't apply so much at this stage of the game, but in the end game, they often get in your king's way. So like if you have a pawn which is racing towards promotion and you have a knight you want to stop it with, like the b7 pawn, for example, in this position is a terrible square to put your knight to try and stop the a pawn, because firstly, once the a pawn gets a bit closer, the knight has to take a long journey to get back towards a8, and if you have your king coming in support, the knight can kind of block its way. So if that pawn pushed, then the king would have no access to a8. Dumb squares, I think that's what Ellen called them. Perhaps not official terminology, but the point being that you don't want to put your knights there if you can. So of course, that doesn't quite apply at this stage of the game. But again, you don't often hear about fianchettoed knights because the knight there just doesn't do very much. So black developing the knight. Now the question is where that knight wants to end up, because it would be a bit strange to have set up a rook and queen battery only to block it with your horse. But of course, from the square, you're applying more pressure to the c5 pawn, which is quite advanced and not supported by its fellow pawns. So Ellen will have to look to defend it. And hello, Slumka. Okay, so yes, that's also, I've seen it, you're right. Jesus de la Villa's 100 Endgames, he, in the chapter about knight versus pawn, I think he calls them dumb squares. Well remembered. So yeah, Ellen needs to defend this pawn. And so you could defend with the queen, or you could defend with the bishop, but I don't think you can do that just yet, because if you do this now, you end up losing a pawn. So the only option to defend the pawn is with the queen. And then the question is, from where do you want to do that? I would feel like coming back to the c file makes more sense, because then you free up these pawns to add support, because you don't want to tie down two heavy pieces to support a pawn. No offense to any pawns in chat, but you're not that important. So if you play something like queen c3, you free up the b file for b4, and perhaps further support with a3, and you're also putting some pressure on this knight here, which doesn't really have, okay, but then I guess another idea here for black is to play, this is interesting maybe. It's good to hear, Fly. As I say, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. So I guess the point is that black can apply more pressure to c5 by playing knight to d7. And so if you go with something like queen c3, I mean, you can then defend it with the pawn, so then that pressure isn't coming too much. Although, yeah, you might get some exchanges happening there. But if you were to keep the queen on the b file, then this isn't going to be an option, because that would hang this pawn here. So maybe there's an argument to be made for queen b4 instead. So good people of chat, how would you defend the c5 square? Okay, sorry, I should have timed that better. Ellen does go for queen c3. As I said, it makes sense because you want to defend your pawns with pawns when you can. That's the whole point of setting up pawn chains. So now I suspect if we do see knight to d7, Ellen will respond with b4. I think that's essentially forced. But now the point is also that with the knight moving away, black is losing some control over the e4 square. So you could perhaps see a break coming that way. Nice, a multi-purpose move from Heir Apparent. It's always good to do multiple things with a single move. It keeps your opponent guessing. But yeah, I wonder now if knight d4 becomes a bit more of a viable option to try and attack one of these attackers of the c5 square. And welcome, Hannah. So another celebrity has joined us in the Twitch chat. If you are lurking on YouTube, feel free to join us on Twitch, where the party is at. So Hannah, of course, familiar to viewers of this channel, having commentated the exciting game we had yesterday. And she did a fantastic job, a lot of dedication. She stayed up well beyond 1 a.m. I think in the end to bring the game to us. Fortunately, I do not live in Australia, so I don't have to quite make those sacrifices. I expect this game will end quite a bit earlier for me. And if you didn't wish Hannah yesterday, it was her Twitch partner anniversary, so feel free to congratulate her now. Why do I hate Australia? Well, that's a very simple question to answer. I don't have to go back too far. The World Cup final. Yes. Last year's Cricket World Cup, Australia beat India in the final pretty convincingly. And yeah. But no, Australia is of course a country. One of the countries of the world. And I suppose there are some things to like about it. It has penguins. That is a plus. And thank you, Screws, for gifting us up to Hannah Sace. Very kind of you. It's a good question, Zelda. I think so. I think they would. They're just that overpowered when it comes to cricket. Especially with Steve Smith, opener extraordinaire. Welcome, Paul. Ellen is doing all right. She has, the position has remained equal throughout, according to the engine. So we can, since we also had Hannah join us recently, we can quickly recap how the game has unfolded. So we saw 1d4, no surprise to fans of Ellen Nilsson. It became a Queen's Gambit, declined. In the exchange variation, Ellen brought her bishop out before completing the pawn chain. All fairly normal moves so far. So here you would maybe expect to see black castle or play c6 to complete the Carlsbad structure. But at this point, black went for a different plan, moving that knight to f8 and then bringing it to e6 rather, where it attacks the bishop on g5. So Ellen retreated her bishop, and then we saw a very unusual move from black. So going for this g6 pawn push. Now it's more normal to play g6 when your bishop is still on f8 so that you can fianchetto it. But black had other plans. They wanted to fianchetto their knight instead. And so here, rook c1 was a novelty, according to the Lichess database. But there had been very few games in this position prior to that as well. The knight f8, knight c6. So I'm not very well versed in chess theory. So perhaps the more knowledgeable people in chat could tell us. It did catch us a bit by surprise. And yeah, it's also getting quite deep into sideline territory according to the database. But yeah, I suppose maybe it makes some sense to put some pressure against this bishop. And, like here we're also wondering if perhaps knight g6 was an idea. But then, you're just looking at squares which are controlled by white pawns. So at least by coming to e6 instead, you're performing a bit more of a function. But yeah, you're certainly getting a lot of knight moves in there. So 1, 2, 3. And then after the fianchettoing of the knight, that was a fourth move with the knight. So some violation of opening principles here. But we felt, I mean, the point of this maneuver was to gain some control over the f5 square, because black wanted to challenge the light squared bishop, which in the Carlsbad structure is the stronger of the two bishops that white has. So Ellen played rook c1, looking at this semi-open file. A bit of a waiting move, we felt, to see what black wanted to do. Black finally castled, and then Ellen played this prophylactic king h1 in preparation of an f3 push at least, perhaps setting up a central pawn break, making room for the bishop, and making sure the king is not going to be on this subsequently weakened file. Diagonal. So then black completes the Carlsbad pawn structure finally. Ellen does go for f3, and then we saw the bishop come out here. And so Ellen had the option of taking, and then the knight would take, and then the bishop would have to move. But Ellen thought that, okay, instead of doing that, I'll just move the bishop immediately, since it'll have to come to f2 anyways. And then black went for the trade, and this allowed Ellen to develop her queen in the exchange. Black developed their queen to connect the rooks, and then Ellen was repositioning her knight here, and then black traded the knight for their bishop. Welcome, Blue Boy. Good to see you here as well. So then black moved their queen to where it was looking at two of white's pawns, and yeah, so Ellen made this move here, I guess with the idea being of putting some pressure on b7, but the problem with this is it kind of blocks these pawns, and we were expecting that maybe there would be some sort of minority attack. And so when black brought out another piece to attack the pawn, Ellen had to add another defender to the pawn, and so she did so with queen c3, and I think this is when you joined us. So as we expected, the other knight came to apply pressure, and this was defended with b4, and now the knight just goes back again. Yeah, I mean, I guess you want to have this battery looking down a semi-open file, and that pawn is now defended, so you're not really going to, there's not too much point in applying pressure to the c5 square anymore. You could have thought about maybe playing b6, but then I guess the point is that when there are exchanges, you're going to be hanging the c6 pawn. So that's not a move you can play yet. You would need to prepare it at some point. So yeah, this brings us to the live position we have here. Hannah, at any point, if you want to replace me as commentator, feel free, say the word, and we will make it happen. But okay, I think we can. Wow, Blue Boy wants me to be replaced by Hannah. That hurts. Okay, so I'll pause with the analysis for now. So we have below some live video feed from the playing hall, except, as I was telling people earlier, we don't actually have a video set up from Bhubaneswar, so I asked some AI image generators to generate pictures of Ellen playing chess in India, and this is what it came up with. So it's almost like being there ourselves. This is the future of chess commentary. Yep. Indoor grass. So this was Magnus Carlsen cheering Ellen on as she plays chess. But Magnus Carlsen looks a bit bulkier than what I remember. Yeah. I should say, of course, I didn't want to actually pay for any of these images. So this is the free, the kind of free image generators. I don't know if perhaps I went for like ChatGPT 4 and DALL-E then maybe we'd have had some better representations. But yeah. Yeah, fair point. He's had some time to hit the gym now that he's not defending world championships anymore. But yeah, I guess the Chessable, whatever it's called, I don't even know what the branding is currently, Champions Chess Tour, I guess that is getting underway. So I think they've been playing the preliminary rounds, and the actual tournament will be starting soon. So Magnus will be involved in that. Personally, what I'm quite excited to see is this classical 960 tournament. I think in Germany, which will be taking place towards the end of or later on this month. So that should be quite interesting to see. Chess without the opening theory, but with longer time controls. And yeah, I guess, but even back in the days of Fischer, people thought that maybe this would be the future of chess, to kind of decrease the influence of computers. Yeah, that's a good question, Zelda. I don't actually know. I haven't looked at any of the details of the tournament. I think I saw someone say in a Twitch chat somewhere that they would only have a few minutes to look at the positions beforehand. Because I think the idea, at least I think what Magnus's wish is that chess should be played on the board, at the board rather. So without the opening prep, without engine analysis to prepare your opening lines, that you sit down, you get this position, you calculate on the board, and so then yes, it's usually done with a few minutes, but like the 960 championship, I think the at least the one that's played in St. Louis, I think that is rapid. I think so. Like the games are only a few minutes long. So yeah, this GOAT tournament, the time control is a classical time control. So the players actually have time to really get into calculations, and they're not just playing purely on instinct or intuition. But yeah, without the opening preparation. Perhaps Lupai, but I don't think anything involving the top players like this tournament will have. And congratulations, Mas, on the near peak. Get those Lichess numbers up there as well. But okay, I think I scared Hannah off with my request to be substituted. So we will soldier on by ourselves. So yeah, this is a move we were talking about earlier. Getting that piece into play. So from here, the knight is looking into the enemy territory. It controls some of the light squares, and then perhaps the bishop can help control the dark squares. Of course, you need to make sure you don't hang the pawn. So I'd expect that we maybe see a rook coming to e1. Now it's not clear which rook would be best placed to do that, because earlier the rook on c1 was supporting c5, but now we have the pawn to do that. So maybe you could even bring this rook over, because if you do want to go for some sort of pawn break in the middle and attack this king side, then having a rook on f1 could prove to be beneficial. And yeah, I don't know, also maybe very long down the line, this is something I often get in trouble with. But when you have this battery here, if you have the f rook moving to e1, then perhaps, as I say, much further down the line, when it gets if it gets captured in an exchange, it would come with check against the king. Whereas if you bring this rook, then if there's an exchange, it's not with check, and then that perhaps gives you time for a Zwischenzug or an intermezzo. And congratulations, Blue Boy, on the Blitz rating. Although, Yes. Commiserations on the dropping below. That is a coconut, yes. They have these coconuts in the supermarkets here. They come with like this little plastic thing on top, so you just punch the plastic thing down, it pierces the coconut, and then you stick in a straw and you drink the water. Thank you for the congratulations, and thank you, Arturs, for the raid. So big shout out to GM Nike. I mean, I know we have a cultured audience here on this channel, so I'm sure you're all following Arturs already, but in case you're not, please do give him a sorry. I don't mean to raid, I mean to shout out. Oh my goodness. That would have been a bit of a blunder. There we go, I know how to mod. But yes, I saw you were live a bit earlier. Of course, it's a bit a bit embarrassing to be, I can't even call this commentary now that we have a proper commentator in chat, but yeah, long-term followers of Ellen's channel will remember Nike from the commentary they did together, which was a lot of fun. Although I forget now which event it was. It was you, Ellen, and Raluca. But I remember there's a lot of talk about bathtubs. Where, I don't know, I don't think we can easily create a bathtub in this position, but a bathtub is when you have pawns in this shape here. So if you imagine that knight was a pawn, then if Ellen were to play g4, she would create a bathtub here. Yes, and FIDE Grand Prix, that sounds right, for Chess24. And actually, let's have a moment of silence for Chess24, which I believe has been decommissioned now. Okay, thank you for that somber moment. But yes, unfortunately, Chess24 is no more, having been bought out by Chess.com. It was, I guess, no longer needed. It was a great website to be able to follow chess tournaments, so I hope that Lichess and Chess.com continue to improve their tournament coverage to make up for the loss of Chess24. The other thing that was very enjoyable was Banter Blitz, where you would get to play, well, okay, Chess24 premium members would get to play against the some of the very best players in the world on Banter Blitz. But yeah. So I don't think the Twitch channels are gone. At least, yeah, I had asked about this and in a Twitch chat, and from what I was told is that the Chess24 channels will be used to broadcast the OTB events that they cover, and I guess the Chess.com channel will be used more for online events on Chess.com itself. So for example, for Tata Steel, that was being covered on the Chess24 channel and not on the Chess channel. It's, you know, such a high profile event, and you know, you had people like Danya and Hess commentating. They were doing that on the Chess24 channel. Not good enough to have, but we are hopefully back now. I think I had a bit of a glitch with the internet, which also caused issues in OBS. So hopefully things will go smoothly now. So yeah, if you don't see anything or hear anything, try refreshing. We should be live once again, and apologies for the mishap. Good to see you all again. So there were some moves played during our little blackout. So yeah, I think we saw this knight coming here. Black also centralizing their own knight. Again, now that they're no longer putting or trying to put pressure on c5. And then Ellen plays the rook here. As we expected, a rook to come to e1 to support this pawn on e3, which frees up the bishop to go to the more active long diagonal. And now we saw f5, which the engine really does not like. Sorry. I will fix that. I guess. Thank you for pointing that out. After I restarted OBS, the scenes shifted slightly because I don't really know what I'm doing here. And let me do that here as well. Okay, hopefully the name should be back in place with the clocks. I your pride warms my heart. So f5 was played by our opponent, which yeah, the engine says is a bit of a misstep. Or I guess actually knight e5 is where the evaluation started going up. Perhaps because it relieves a bit of pressure on this pawn, it gives Ellen a bit of time to make her pieces more active. And now f5 is certainly an interesting move because, yeah, you're not going to be able to support the knight on here for long. I would expect maybe that this bishop is looking to come to g3. And yeah, I mean, f5 is just really opening up the king to some extent. I'm not sure what that pawn is, or what the idea behind f5 is. So if any of the good chess players in chat could shed some light on what the idea here is, I would be very grateful. I mean, I wonder if it's just that they're trying to defend against some sort of central pawn break, but it feels a bit unnecessary. Moin Dirkje. So Dirkje has often been in streams where I've been asked to commentate, and he keeps me very honest. So I do this little bit of cheating where I keep the evaluations on. I think Dirkje would prefer it if I had no engine assistance whatsoever. But yeah, so I have the engine evaluations on. You can see the bar to the right, but I don't have any move suggestions from the engine. So we can see when things change and when we should pay extra close attention, but then we have to figure out the moves on our own, which is challenging for someone like me, but it's much easier when we have Dirkje in chat, because Dirkje has an excellent record of predicting the moves that we see in the games. So he's going to load up with some coffee and then tell us what's going to happen before it happens. But yeah, I mean, you can see that there are no move suggestion arrows on the board. If you really want, I will give you a quick peek behind the scenes. So I have the evaluation up here, but no move suggestions, no lines. So only a little bit of help. The mildest case of engine assistance. Yeah, I remember during one State of the Union broadcast on chess.com, Danny had mentioned that they were going to introduce a mode. I forget what it was called, or if it had a name. But the point was that you could see the engine evaluations without the best lines. So yeah, like if your opponent blundered, then you would know to be on the lookout for some tactics or something like that. but then of course the opponent would have the same assistance against you. Yeah, I don't watch it. It's way too long and not particularly interesting. But then, if there is something interesting, I see clips or discussion on Reddit. Yeah, I think the games are meant to be unrated, or perhaps a separate rating category. But I don't know if they ever went ahead with that. I don't think I've seen it anywhere. But yeah, it is an interesting idea. I mean, what I would maybe consider, like, it's maybe going a bit too far to always see the engine evaluations, because kind of as people kind of say, it's a lot easier to solve puzzles when you know that they're puzzles, when you know that there's a tactic on the board. So having the evaluation all the time maybe makes it a bit too easy. But what might be interesting is if you're allowed a limited number of evaluation lookups. So kind of like, a lifeline on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something. If you're in a position and you're like, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't work, and then you could push a button and it would show you the engine evaluation, and you could think, okay, so there is a tactic, and then I should do something here. Or if you're just unsure about a position, then you want to see whether you're in trouble or whether you are winning and should push for an advantage. That could be an interesting mode. But yeah. So yeah, what kind of prompted this discussion in my mind was that we saw the evaluation move a fair bit in Ellen's favor. So kind of for the first 20 moves or so, it was always essentially at like 0.5 at most, but much closer to 0. And in fact, in the last couple of moves, it had even dipped a bit below 0. But now after knight e5, so here the evaluation was plus 0.3. Here it became plus 0.7. And okay, it's not a huge difference, but it's certainly beginning to look a bit more favorable for white in the engine's eyes. But yeah, Dirkia says it's difficult to predict the move. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this bishop is not a happy piece right now, and so I'd be looking at moving it to this diagonal. It's active, it sees a lot of squares, it hits the center squares in particular, and if you can put some pressure on b7, then it would make it difficult for a rook to come in to defend from behind. So that would be something I'd look at. With the knights having also moved away from their attack of c5, you could maybe look at launching the minority attack. SOA, STD. I'm very confused by Dirkia's messages right now. Okay, so now I don't just need somebody to explain the position to me, I also need somebody to explain Dirkia's messages. But okay, so Dirkia said it was difficult to predict the move, so I picked up the slack for him. And bishop g3 is indeed what Ellen went for. It feels fairly natural that you put it on quite an active diagonal, and so far unobstructed diagonal. And you could maybe have ideas at some point of parking that bishop. Okay, so we said that d6 would be a nice outpost for the knight, but it's difficult to get the knight there because it would have to hop there from a light square, and those light squares are firmly in black's control. But if this knight were to move, then you could perhaps look at planting a bishop there instead, where it could, take away quite a lot of squares from the black camp. Now the problem is, of course, if you put a bishop there, then black can look to exchange it for a knight, and then if you recapture that pawn, becomes very weak, and you would lose it. So perhaps, bishops are better as long-range snipers rather than putting them centrally. So it's maybe not somewhere you'd want to park your bishop, but it's maybe nice to have it accessible if black were to do something like try to support the f-pawn with the rook. And yeah, we see we're ticking down towards the business end of the game. So again, if you are joining us for the first time in this tournament, the time control is 90 plus 30. So 90 minutes from the start of the game, 30 seconds increment per move, and there's no additional time control after 40 moves or anything like that. So this is pretty much, say for the increment, this is all the time they get. Goodness. But yes, so the players are approaching or having just crossed the half-hour mark on their clocks. So the opponent is on 27 minutes and Ellen has 32 minutes. So yeah, we're a bit far away from time triple just yet, but it's going to start to be more and more of a factor as this game progresses. And so it's good to see that Ellen is up on the clock for now. And so the first thing Blue Boy has said in chat for a long time is, what do you think of h6 g5? Looking to start a kingside pawn storm. Well, I mean, yeah, perhaps that was the idea behind f5 to get this underway. Of course, you can afford to play g5 because the knight is currently defending f5. But yeah, I'm not sure if it quite works because I don't think you have the pieces in support. Your king also being on the g-file, you're just weakening the position of your king. So I think that would be a bit risky. So instead the opponent goes with knight to h5, looking to challenge his bishop and trade it off. And of course this would be quite a dangerous trade, I suppose, because you're then opening up the h-file that your king is on, and black could perhaps look to get some pieces in there. So yeah, I think that would be a bit risky, allowing the capture on g3. You could play bishop. Okay, so Ellen goes for the exchange on e5. What I was looking at, what I was wondering, is if you could play here. Okay, and apparently that's not much good, but what I was thinking is, of course, then it cannot be captured because then you're losing the knight here due to the pin. So you could have maybe kept the bishop alive, but then perhaps, I guess you don't capture. What you would maybe do instead is push this pawn and force the bishop back, or force the capture there, but have advanced your pawns with tempo. So that would be why Ellen didn't opt for it. Instead we saw the exchange on e5, and now Ellen is going with that queenside, the minority attack here, looking to undermine this pawn chain and open things up to bring some pieces into the game from the queen side. Oh, that's what SOA was. I'm so sorry. Okay, now I completely understand. Okay, I don't completely understand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I understand what Dirk meant. I forgot that SOA was the name of the title. So SOA is the name of the sponsors of the tournament. I don't know what the full form of SOA is, I'm afraid. I suppose I should. But yeah, so this is so apparently SOA is Dutch for STD. And I don't know, people felt compelled to share that in chat. But yes, this tournament is being held in India, not in the Netherlands. So I am fairly certain that is not why it is called the SOA, International Grandmasters Chess Festival. And yeah, one thing Ellen did say, that even though it's called the first SOA International Grandmasters Chess Festival, it's the first edition that this sponsor is behind the tournament. But it has been like this tournament has taken place before with different sponsors, so it's maybe the 7th or 8th edition of the tournament. But yeah, I'm not finding I'm not able to see quite what SOA is. Oh well, a mystery to be solved another day, perhaps. Okay, so Ellen does now go for this minority attack. B5, we can expect perhaps A4 will follow, and if black takes, then they are allowing C6 to be pushed, perhaps. So the point is to destabilize the pawns, black's pawns on the queen side. Here white has the minority, black has the majority. It's 3 versus 4, so it's called a minority attack. And yeah, you just want to ruin the structure, undermine the defense of this d5 pawn, and create some weaknesses in the black camp. And hello, Perpetual Checkmate. I'm glad we're all learning together. This is being held in Bhubaneswar in India, in Odisha, so on the east coast of India. And yeah, I don't know if there's been a chance for the players to do any sightseeing, but yeah, hopefully Ellen and the other players are enjoying their time both on and off the board. Here we see this black knight is a bit offsides on h5. Knight on a rim is dim and all that, and it's not kind of looking at some great squares here on the white side, so it might get rerouted again to come to be positioned more centrally. Like we might see something like this, where it again puts pressure on the c5 square that can now no longer be protected by a pawn after this push. That's okay, Dirk. It's nice to have activity in chat, no matter how questionable. And yeah, welcome back again, Vlad. I hope you. I don't think it's been 3 hours, so I guess, unsurprisingly, you finished what you had to do with great haste. And I refer only to Vlad's penchant for playing chess very quickly, and no other activities he might partake in. Yeah, I've also never heard practical being used for rapid chess, but I imagine that perhaps it's a more old-fashioned term. Interesting. So are we going to see Blue Boy and Heir Apparent playing in the next edition of the Australian Championships? Were you inspired by your visits? It's a good question. I would have no idea, Blue Boy, but maybe Heir knows. Heir knows Heir. Okay, that's progress. We'll take what we can get. Yeah, I believe Hannah is going to be playing in Dobell. So you might see a streamer matchup. I don't know if there are different groups or something like that. Okay, so while we wait for a response from Black here, they are using up their clock in this position, so they've gone under 20 minutes now. Ellen on 32 minutes, as we said earlier, so now she has quite a sizable advantage on the clock, which will help her. So right now it's an equal position according to the engine, but with such an unequal position on the clocks, you've got to start favoring white. But we looked a bit earlier at the game on board 3, which has now ended in favor of the GM, as we were expecting. So let's perhaps see. So we last left him here, and we were saying that here kind of the threat was to play bishop a5 to kick away the blockader of the pawn. So Black took that square away, and instead, okay, so we had predicted that the rook would come to d5 to try and add some more defense. So instead White defends the pawn laterally and now has renewed the threat of bishop a5. And yes, I guess this is necessary here. And so now White is going to come round the other side instead. And yeah, I see. So very nicely kicking the bishop back, getting another pawn very far advanced. And in this position, Black resigns. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're just simply threatening perhaps to go after the a7 pawn in this position, and it's just falling apart for Black. So a nice smooth victory on board 3 for White. That's the only result on the top 10 board so far. There is a draw on board 12, and yeah, all the other games in the top 20 still ongoing. And in particular, on Ellen's board, we're still waiting for a move from her opponent, Gaurav Kumar, as he ticks down towards 15 minutes. So yeah, I will once again take a short break and be back with you shortly. Or once I have fixed the be right back screen. Hello again. Not quite a coffee break there. I had to let the coconut water complete its journey. But yes, we're back now. And I see Blue Boy is asking questions about a queen trade. So he had a couple moves. So let's look at what happened. So this is where we're taking our break. Rook played to c8, makes sense. If any trades are here, then you can control. You have some more control over c6, and then Ellen continuing with the minority attack, supporting the pawn on b5. And so Blue Boy was asking about a queen trade. I would think in this position the black king is a bit more vulnerable than the white king, which still has some more pawn cover. So usually in such a situation you don't want to trade queens as the attacking side. As white in this position, you'd like to keep the queens on the board. The other reason I think why a trade is unfavorable for white is they've pushed these pawns more. So they have a bit more space perhaps here. And so then you need to have some pieces to control that space. If there are some trades, then these pawns can become perhaps vulnerable to attack and become targets. So yeah, I don't think Ellen would necessarily be looking to trade queens unless you can get something more out of the position. But yeah, the question also is how would you instigate the trade of queens? Right, so like, yeah, okay, you can maybe look at some sort of discovery if you move the knight out of the way, but I don't think there's a very useful square for it to go to. The problem being, of course, that the black queen is defended. As I say that, it moves, but it's still moving to a square where it's defended. So you cannot, there's no good kind of, or I don't think it's possible to set up some sort of Zwischenzug where you perhaps attack this and then force black to capture queens so that you can play something in between. Okay, so Blue Boy says after b5, he's looking at c takes b5. Okay, c takes b5, knight takes to allow the queen trade like that. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that was perfectly playable. You perhaps are then kind of weakening your pawns here. So now you get two isolated pawns. But maybe yeah. But yeah, okay, so black goes with queen f6, which again the engine, okay. I guess it doesn't mind too much, but once again the eval bar is edging slightly closer to being favorable for white. And yeah, I guess one reason for this is that this knight is, I mean, that was one square that the knight could possibly have gone back to. And so now if you want to reroute the knight to a better square, rather than being on the side of the board, it now has to go back to g7 again. We'll have to look at how many times the knight has gone to g7 to where it can potentially come here. Now you can't quite put pressure on the knight right now because again you're just weakening your king side and then you're opening up a file for the queen. But that, yeah, could be something to look out for in the future perhaps. Yeah, okay, so c takes b5 is of course an option. I would expect we would then see a recapture with the a pawn. Yeah, so Fly You Fools is saying it's almost forced because again, if you take here, if you take with the knight, okay, but maybe what Blue Boy is having in mind, if here say, perhaps if you take with the knight, you're threatening knight to d6, perhaps. So that might be one reason to consider taking with the knight, so you're kind of forking the pawn and the fork at the same time. So yeah, that maybe could have been a move. But yeah, we have this position here currently. And yeah, as Dirk said, Ellen has quite a lot more time. She's almost 20 minutes to the good. Opponent down to 11 minutes. Ellen has 29. So she can certainly afford to take her time and calculate. And look who we have in chat. We have fellow mod and commentator Akjet. Thank you very much for the resubscription for 38 months. That's quite some time. And I suppose if you all go and follow Akjet, if you weren't already doing so, then perhaps that will convince him to come back to streaming. But yes, if you were here earlier, of course, in round 2, Akjet was commentating for Ellen's wonderful win against the GM in round 2. So hopefully now, and then yesterday when she was playing against the GM, Akjet was in chat and she was playing perfectly, holding the position equal, and then he had to go, and then she lost the game. So obviously Akjet is her good luck charm. So him showing up now for this end game, or not end game, but I guess late middle game, is nothing but a good sign. Is it not pinned anymore? So the link to the board should be pinned. I don't know if it disappeared with the interruption we had. Yeah, I'm getting some error now. So let me try again. Hopefully it's visible now. Ellen's score is 4 out of 7. She's been having a great tournament. So she's 4 out of 7 and she's been unlucky to only be 4 out of 7. So she beat an IM and a GM in the first 2 rounds. Then she had a double round where she had black against IMs in both games. The first one she got outplayed, but in the second game she was winning. But then Akjet in Discord said she was a couple good moves away from winning that game, but then she played a bit inaccurately, allowed her opponent to find a tactic and get some counterplay, and he went on to win. So she was 2 out of 4. Then she won her next 2 games in a row when she was down paired, and then in round 7 she was playing against the GM, and was very close to holding a draw. So yeah, she could maybe 3 or 4 moves away from being 5.5 out of 7 instead of 4 out of 7. So yeah, the performance rating speaks for itself. She's been having a really good tournament. And yeah, hopefully, as we were saying today, like if you're just joining or joining recently, even though the opponent is 1953 rated, you shouldn't be fooled by that. His peak rating is over 2300. So he could have been an FM if he went for the title. And yeah, he dropped quite a bit of rating, but then he has been grinding a lot, it seems, recently. I think he's played over 40 games in the last 2 months and has been gaining rating. So he's certainly stronger than the rating would suggest. Which of course is the reason people are hesitant to play sometimes in these tournaments where you get a lot of underrated opponents, because yeah, I mean you just stand to lose a lot of rating in expectation. But yeah, Blue Boy, if you're active in Anama's Discord, or Hannah's Discord I guess, you would have seen news that Blue Boy did play, I think, his first FIDE rated classical tournament recently, and did very well. Thank you very much for the raid, AlexGM96. I will try to give you a shout out without raiding you this time. But we're very happy to have you join us here. So we are watching WFM Ellen Nilsson's tournament in Bhubaneswar, India. This is round 8 out of 10. And she is playing against an underrated opponent in Gaurav Kumar. He's 1953, but as we were just saying, he has been over 2300 previously. And so far, so we've had a Queen's Gambit declined, and it's been fairly even, but Ellen's the one who's pushing a bit more now, and she's well up on the clock. The opponent just went under 10 minutes, Ellen over 25 minutes. It's 90 plus 30, the time control, so 30 seconds of increment per move, but no additional time control after any number of moves. So where can you see the standings? That's a good question. If you follow the link to the Lichess broadcast, and then you go to the broadcast page, you will be able to see the standings, but I will just very quickly copy the link for you as well and post it in chat. So you can see them there. So yeah, my boy Magnus Greer was telling us earlier that the leader is on 6 out of 7. And then there are 4 players on 5.5 out of 7, and further 9 players on 5 out of 7. So Ellen's not too far off the tournament leaders. And yeah, there are prizes for, I think, the top 20 positions or so, at least. So yeah, Ellen could be in the hunt for one of those prizes. Yeah, I did notice when I was looking at the standings a bit earlier that I think it was an IM and an FM leading the field at that time, when but the GM's a fair bit further behind. So okay, let's get back to the position. So Ellen went with G3. I guess maybe you want to take this square away if you're looking at some pushing. Also perhaps to prevent the queen from getting into the game and allowing some tactics against the pinned pawn here. And so the knight hops back instead. So it's gone to G7, or at least, I don't know if it's been the same knight every time. I guess I should check this. But the opponent has had a knight on G7 quite a few times in this game. And yeah, so one thing to note here is that by going back, this queen is now undefended. So I wonder if there are any tactical shots with the discovered attack. I don't currently see anything that could work. Like if you go here, if takes, you don't have to check because the rook is defending. But yeah, hopefully that's something that could be blundered in the low time that the opponent has left on the clock. But yeah, sorry to hear about the lack of snacks, Mats. But how did your rapid game end? Did your opponent come back? Come back to the game, I mean, not come back in the game. I'm hoping they lost. But yes, again, thank you very much, Alex GM, for the raid. I hope you had a great stream. I presume you were streaming some chess. And yeah. To those of you who have come for the raid, welcome to the channel. So I'm not Ellen Nilsson, as you might have surmised or seen from the command. I'm one of the mods on this channel. Ellen Nilsson is playing in this tournament. So please do give the channel a follow, and you'll get to see her when she comes back to her regular streaming. And you will enjoy it much more than you will enjoy today's stream. But yeah, okay, so Akchet is giving his vote of confidence to Ellen with some rather damning criticism of the opponent's play. But indeed, maybe if we very quickly kind of just keep an eye on this G7 square to see how many times it's been occupied by a knight. So here we first had the fianchettoed knight, which sat there for quite some time before it decided to come out of its home position, hop around. Okay, so this time it was the other knight that went to G7. Then it finally came out, and then now it's gone back. So both knights have sat on G7 for some time. This knight has been there now twice. And yeah, it's not a square you usually want to put a knight on. Yeah, the question is whether Ellen will be able to take advantage of this perhaps slightly aimless shuffling of the horsey. He is, of course, pushing forward with this queenside minority. But currently, black has sufficient defense of the c6 square. So there's no trade to be had there. Yeah, so that's the question, blue. But how do you break through? Yeah, do you want to open things up in the middle here as white somehow? And then the question is how? Because of course, if you try to do that, you are also exposing your own king somewhat. Yeah, you don't currently have enough control over e4. a5 says Akchet to really go after these queenside pawns. And then if takes, you take back with the knight. And then, okay, so let's see. So push, takes, take back with the knight. And I guess you want to take with the rook so that you don't hang this pawn here. But Akchet offers a different continuation. So he says a5, a6, b takes a6, b takes a6, and then you claim the open file and you look to double up, which also seems like a nice idea. Is there any merit? Sorry, not rook b3, said rook b6. I was just going to ask. And that is much, much nicer because you're hitting these pawns. And if takes, then you can create a passed pawn. Yes. Yeah. No, so this would be great to see for white. So let's see. Yeah, so rook b8 is not a move you can afford as black because of this resource. I wonder if maybe you go rook. No, that doesn't work either. Maybe you need to try and set up some counterplay down the center as well to keep the rooks in contact with each other. So okay, so yeah, some ideas there. And of course Ellen has been pushing these pawns, so she is of course keeping this minority attack in mind. As you were saying earlier, with the Carlsbad structure that we had, white's play is towards the queen side, so it makes sense that she's pushed the pawns that way. And welcome Alias 2020 Chess. It's, yeah, okay, I'm not the right person to evaluate things. It is an equal position according to the engine. Whether it's drawish, I'm not so sure. I mean, there is quite a bit of asymmetry in the pawn structure. I guess now the material is equal and symmetric. So yeah, probably with best play, it should be a draw. But we also want to highlight that Ellen has 25 minutes, her opponent has under 9 minutes. So Ellen will be able to exert some pressure there, and you know, if she attacks, then she'll have more time to take advantage of any missteps from her opponent. But yeah. And yeah, some more. No added time, Blue Boy. So the time pressure is there to stay. Again, a nice suggestion from Fly You Fools, saying that you can look to get the queen out of this pin to free up the knight, because white, as we were saying earlier, white probably doesn't want to trade queens, because if you trade the queens it becomes even more trash. But we have had some moves now, so a5 was indeed played, so well done Akchet for finding the idea. Oh no, sorry, a5 was not played. That was my analysis. Again, I get confused. Queen a5 was played instead. So going after these pawns with the queen. So combining the two ideas, Akjet's ideas of going for the queenside pawns and Fly You Fool's idea of relieving the pin on the knight. So a nice combination, a nice 2-for-1 there. And yeah, I guess having the knight on a5 makes some sense because it hits both of these pawns. But on the other hand, yeah, the knight being on the rim is a bit suboptimal. So right now you have a centralized knight, which is usually better. So then the question is, how do you defend this pawn as as black? I suppose the most obvious idea seems to be rook to a8, which makes the rook more passive again. And then you perhaps have designs on the c6 pawn. Is there any other way? Yeah, I mean that just seems to cause problems. Okay, so I guess this is an analysis board, so yeah, this is just dropping a pawn for black. I was wondering if there's any joy to be had with this. But I guess you just take here and you're happy. So yeah, rook a8 seems to be, but okay, so rook a8 is no good according to the engine. So yeah, this doesn't work either. And I would imagine it's because you're probably, okay, that's not the move. Okay, so the engine or the evaluation bar has settled down a bit. Do we have any joy? Okay, so yeah, maybe this is the move. Queen c7, you hit this pawn here. Yes, sorry, Akjet of course got there much earlier. But yeah, I guess the point is if you try to defend this pawn instead, then you're just going to lose here. Or maybe taking with the knight is even better. Nope, that's not. Rook e7. Good question. Is wondering what happens here. So your rook has to move. Welcome back, my boy Magnus Guri. Things are looking good. And yeah, I guess. Okay, I don't know how much of this was forced, but you're getting active there. Well, I hope you succeeded in fixing your PC's Wi-Fi, and you post updates about the adapter in the general channel of a certain Discord server. But yes, I guess rook e7, the point is you get queen d6, and then if the queens are exchanged, you do this with tempo against the rook, and that means you can win the pawn here. So yeah, it seems very difficult to defend the pawns. Akjet suggesting the same. So yeah, this was a great spot. Well done to both Akjet and Ellen for finding it. And yeah, we looked at this earlier, this didn't work either. So okay, but the engine says it's plus 0.3. which means that there should be some compensation or some better defense. Okay, and we've had a few moves. So let's get back to the live position. So we had queen a5 and rook e7 was played. Yeah, so just giving up that pawn. As Aktert said, the evaluation now is plus 1.1 Magnus Curie. So yeah, looking very good, bright and sunny for Ellen. And most importantly, with this tricky move queen a5, the opponent spent 5 minutes finding a response. So they are now under 3.5 minutes on their clock. Ellen on 18 minutes. And she takes the pawn. I mean, you have to take the juicer. Aktert, meanwhile, is following the GM he commentated to defeat against Ellen, and is happy to report that Estas won. Although I'm a bit confused because I thought I saw earlier that he was playing on... Okay, sorry, I had scrolled down. So yes, he was playing on the top board and he won with the white pieces, just as Ellen looks like she will be doing in this game as well. So yeah, I guess even despite losing to Ellen, he's having a great tournament. Otherwise, maybe he learned a thing or two from their game. So the opponent going to double up, putting pressure on this e3 pawn, looking for a counterplay in the center. After Ellen is mopping up the pawns on the queen side. Of course, Ellen is threatening to create some passed pawns. The question is, do you defend this pawn? How do you defend it? Yeah, I guess you can't do this, right? Because if takes... Okay, wait, you can do that. All right, because I can't count. So these are terrible moves. I was thinking that this is undefended, but you end up a rook to the good. Wow. We have some mod action in chat. But I'm not going to be offended if someone suggests I'm not as good as a GM Aktert. I think that is a reasonable claim to make. So yes, King e6 for black. Knight e6, I presume. Yeah. Okay, but let's see. So Ellen takes the pawn. Let's keep up with the live position. We have some exchanges. Okay, so Ellen takes this pawn, and now Ellen has this passed a pawn, but she is going to look to rush up the board as quickly as she can. So she is offering the e3 pawn to be taken. Welcome Waterford Wizard. And so the e3 pawn is taken. We're going to see some rooks exchanged now. And then this knight will be hanging, but I guess the point is that this knight can take here. You then give this pawn away, perhaps, but then you have two passed pawns. And you have a king which is vulnerable to checks now that there's no rook on the back rank. And there we have it, as expected. So yeah, the tactics are shaking out in Ellen's favor, it seems. So yeah, we had... I don't think it's completely winning. And okay, so Blue Boy with a very nice spot saying that you can trade the queens with queen d8. where you fork the king and the queen, and with the queens off the board, with a supported passer and a passer on the a file as well, the rook and the knight, well, the knight is out of the game on this dumb square that we've talked about before, and that rook is not going to be able to give mate. So yeah, this does look quite crushing for white here. So I guess maybe you have to look at bringing the rook back. Okay, so if you bring it back here, you still allow queen d8. So then maybe you're looking at rook to e8. Yes, I will do a chair spin if Ellen wins, when Ellen wins. Okay, so Akjet says d4, queen d8, queen d8, knight d8, rook c3. Okay, and then this is equal. So good counterplay found by Akjet. So this doesn't work. The point being that if takes, then you're not stopping the pawn. Yeah, you can't stop the pawn in time because you've put your knight way out of the game. So okay, so that plan doesn't work if d4 is pushed. Can you just threaten the pawn instead? Yes, so maybe you just play rook d1 then. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, indeed, it's not over. But certainly we have the advantage, and we have a move on the board as well. And a move which we should be very happy to see. According to the engine, so queen e6 was played with the idea of attacking here. But does this just allow... Okay, I guess you can block with the knight or something like that, because I was thinking, of course, if the king were to step out of the check, you have this fork. So yeah, but I guess you can just block it here. And you're still better in a good position, but there is better on the board. And what if you... So if you try and put pressure on the queen, there's check, takes check. Can you hide? It looks a bit scary to try and hide with the pawns here and the knight coming into play. Okay, so what is the move here for white that the engine likes so much? Yeah, you have to keep the knight defended. Yeah, I had been wondering if you could do something like queen to b4 to protect a1. Okay, so you're saying queen b1. Okay, queen b8 check. I see. Let's go back. So queen b8 check. Followed by queen f4. Okay, and your idea being that then the knight isn't hanging because the rook is hanging. But okay, so let's say knight blocks. But then you're allowing this, yeah? And I would be... worried that you... Okay, so that doesn't work. Yeah, some sort of perpetual, but do we have time to just put pressure against h3? Or do we have any ideas like this? Okay, I guess you do have time. Sorry, against h2, not h3. Yeah, so I think there are perpetual ideas if you allow this queen rook battery to do its thing. Knight to d4 being suggested. Okay, so that seems like it can work. The idea being, okay, so this still allows perpetuals, because I guess the queen can move to the dark squares instead. But here you can just run. And because the queen is hanging, you don't have time to take the rook. And the knight defends e2. Good night, heir apparent. Thank you for being here. And hopefully you'll wake up to see that Ellen wins. So yeah, if you are new to the channel, then you can consider joining us on Discord. It's not the most active server in the world, but we will be posting updates about the tournaments, and we also play in the Lichess Mega Team Battle every 2 weeks, so you can get notifications and links there in the Discord. And of course, follow Ellen on her socials. We're streaming this on YouTube as well, so if you're watching from YouTube, hello. You can join us on Twitch there. But yeah, she does post on the various channels. I'm not sure the commands are working right now in the YouTube chat. But okay, so yeah, so it's a nice find there from, who was it who suggested knight d4? News 101. Well done. You win the... Okay, as Alessius would say, you win absolutely nothing, because we have no prizes. But this is indeed a very nice spot, and well found by Ellen as well. Yeah, so here again, the idea of lining up the queen and the rook was to give this check and to look for some perpetual ideas. And if you take, then you do fall into a perpetual, because the queen can come here and continue with the checks. And then I guess from here it has access to h6. But the trick with the knight d4 move is that after this check is given, you run with the king instead, and you have 2 pieces under attack here, and the knight defends the checking square. So yes, and so that... Okay, so what happens if takes, and wow, okay, so that's really nice. So you give up the rook, but your passed pawns are just too powerful, that you're still completely winning. Okay, so that is very nice indeed. Okay, and we were having this on the board. So Ellen has calculated it all, and this is a beautiful finish. I'm glad I'm glad to be here calling this game for you guys. So the check was given, king g2 was played, of course the only move that keeps the advantage in this position. And as we saw earlier, this is giving up a rook. She'll be down a rook for a pawn, but these pawns are just too strong, which is just really beautiful. So okay, so how would you go about converting this? I guess you want to... Okay, you don't want to do that. I guess you just push. Okay, and then the knight blocks. So then the pawn promotes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, so beautiful. So okay, the opponent sees that that cannot be played. So let's go back to the main line. Okay, so king g2, the queen came here with the threat of giving a check here, I suppose. So then the rooks get traded, and now the point is that I guess there is no perpetual. Yes, I mean, I guess that's the idea, but I suppose the point is that the knight is well placed to defend. So the king can come to f2, and then the knight can come to e2 to block any checks, and the queen is perfectly placed to support these pawns as they go to promotion. So I don't think, yeah, so I guess, you know, if we see something like this, here, here, the knight comes, and the knight is a beautiful defender of checks from the queen, because it takes away, I mean, okay, the queen is defending that diagonal anyways, but it takes away a lot of the squares that the queen can give checks from. So yeah, you don't get the checks here. Your checks have essentially run out, and now you're just not going to stop this pawn. So yeah, so instead knight e6 played to try and deflect the knight, and I guess then you perhaps have ideas. Let's see if it works. Okay, so it doesn't work, because I guess now with the knight gone, the king is able to run here, I presume, or I mean, I guess the queen can also come back in defense, but yeah, the king can also run. Yeah, so queen f2 is available, but it seems like the king can also run, and without the knight there to perhaps support the pawns or offer some checks, there's no perpetual here. So yeah, it is just a free knight that can be taken. Yeah. So it's looking very good indeed. Opponent down to 40 seconds on their clock. Ellen taking her time to consider whether this really is a free knight. Of course, you don't need to rush this given the board position, given the clock situation. You wouldn't want to step into any traps here. But yeah, I'm sure actually she has calculated, and she's seen that she can afford to take the knight, and so she does do so. And she is now just completely winning. Plus 9.6 says the engine. The check is given. I presume we're going to see king g2, and then yeah, any check can be we can have queen f2 to defend the king, and then yeah, you're going to push the pawn to c7 where it's defended by the knight, and it's going to be very difficult to stop promotion. Yeah, so this game should be done and dusted very soon. Well, I don't think we're going to see c7 in this position, because that would be an illegal move and would lose the game. But yeah. So yeah, this... Okay, so Blue Boy raises an interesting point about whether we are running into problems here. But the answer is apparently no, because I guess... Okay, you don't want to push that pawn. Maybe just bring... Nope. Good question. Queen c2. Okay, that makes more sense. You keep the queen on the second rank to defend against the checks, and then you push the pawns. Nice. But okay, so we saw king h3 instead, so Ellen chooses to run with the king, keeping the queen in position to defend. And now I wonder... Okay, so I guess if queen takes here, you give a check, and then you promote the pawn. Okay, and so we have seen the knight being captured. So the opponent not resigning, letting Ellen play it out. Queen d8 check. And this is on the board. And now, yeah, you don't stop this pawn. I mean, I guess you have some ideas perhaps of giving checks of your own, but you're going to run out of checks very soon. Oh yeah, I was just looking at that as well, Vlad. So the king will have to step onto the 7th rank, and then you can exchange the queens, and then this pawn is going to promote. So the engine gives a slight advantage of plus 96 to white, which is as winning as it gets with Stockfish 16. But yeah, so you need to make sure that you catch the d pawn in that line, but you are in the square of the pawn, while the black king would not be in time to stop this pawn with the c pawn there as well. Okay, and king g7 was played. Okay, this just makes trading immediate now, right? Because you don't stop the d pawn from promoting here. Yeah, so if you are going to play on, I don't understand why you would go for king g7 instead of king f7. Maybe is this what he's planning? To centralize the king, perhaps? But yeah, I mean, the point is you don't get to centralize it because it needs to defend these pawns. Yeah, curious. I doubt it's a DGT error though. And I suspect we will see a resignation very soon. I wonder if Ellen is giving her opponent a bit of a side eye, wondering why he's playing on. But yeah, it looks like we'll have a very satisfactory ending to this excursion. Okay, Ellen just goes for c7 straight up. She says, I will promote without giving the queens away. So mate in 41 says Stockfish now, and I wonder if Ellen has calculated that all out. So yeah, there is one check here. I think this is the only check. And I don't think it does very much at all. And then the queen is defending the diagonal. So okay, g4, okay, even better, block with the pawn. Stay out of range of these pawns, and now there are no checks, well, apart from sacrificing the queen. So yeah. And okay, queen e2 was played to try and come in here and give some checks. Hello again, Hannah. Good to see you back. Let's not count our wins before they hatch. But yes, it would be quite the upset for Ellen to fumble this from here. And she does it very cleanly, giving the check first. To try and get the... I guess the idea is that you want to promote with tempo if you can. You can promote with a check, or perhaps to win this pawn with tempo, so that you keep this defended here. But yeah, it should be just a formality now to see this through. Opponent's clock goes down to 10 seconds as far as we can tell. Okay, so interesting spot there from Akshat, that after you go here, this is the only winning move. So let's say if you were to do something like this, then it becomes mate in 2. Or no, that becomes mate in 2. You give check first, I guess. And then you get mated in unfortunate fashion. But okay, so he goes with king f6 instead. Ellen gives g5 check anyways. The pawn is taken, and then the queen comes back to defend with check, and now she will be able to promote without any threat to her own king. So a very clinical conversion. And yeah, that'll be a win in the books. It'll be 5 out of 8 for Ellen, and unless we are somehow incredibly unlucky, it should definitely mean a live board for tomorrow's round. So do come. Okay, let's wait for the game to finish before we say our goodbyes, but it means we'll be able to come back again tomorrow. Okay, and there we have it, a result on the board. Ellen wins. Congratulations to Ellen. Thank you all for cheering her on. We'll quickly recap how the game unfolded for those of you who maybe joined a bit later on. I'm not looking at you, Akshat. So here things were fairly normal, and then we had this unusual maneuver of fianchettoing the knight, which was a recurring theme throughout the game. Light squared bishops got exchanged, and then Ellen centralized her knight and to provoke the exchange for the bishop. So here this was perhaps slightly I wonder if this was, yeah, I mean the engine also gives us very, very slight edge to black here. Queen b3 is perhaps the wrong plan, and then it invited black to put pressure on the c5 pawn. So Ellen had to do a quick course correction, but she wasn't in any significant danger. And then it wasn't clear how to proceed for black, so they went back to their comfort move of knight g7, keeping the pieces back. And that just allowed Ellen to improve her pieces. That bishop, which was a bit passive, she could trade for one of the knights and then go with this minority attack on the queen side, which eventually paid dividends in spectacular fashion. Yeah, we don't understand knight g7, Paul. I mean, I guess it was maybe used as a rerouting square. But yeah, the point is here, Ellen is the one exerting pressure on the queen side. She's well up on the clock already, 11 minutes to half an hour in this position. And then knight g7 was played again, because of course the knight here is doing nothing. And with the queen on f6, the only way to get the knight back into the game was via g7. And then Ellen found this very nice move of queen a5, hitting these queenside pawns, which were very difficult to defend. And you can see here the position is plus 0.3, so there is a defense. So let's now perhaps turn on the move suggestions from the engine and see what black could have played. Okay, so there were a few moves, and the point was that you say, okay, I give up on these pawns, you bring your knight into the game, and then it's maybe plus 0.5. But instead the opponent tried to defend the pawns a bit, and that just didn't work. Ellen took the pawn. The opponent tried to double up and put pressure on the e-file, but that's just too slow here. And Ellen was just able to create these passed pawns. And it's amazing how quickly the position unfolded for the opponent. It went from what looked quite drawish to just being, a fairly comfortable win. And then there's this very nice resource here, because the opponent was threatening to try and find some perpetuals. And so Ellen found that the knight on d4 did a very solid job of taking away some checking squares, allowing the king to run. And then here we saw that there's this very nice line where Ellen could give up a rook and the pawn would just be unstoppable. You can't stop the promotion. So the opponent couldn't take the rook. So instead, they brought the queen into the attack. But now you could trade off, because the knight can come back to interpose. The opponent tried to give away a knight to try and set up some perpetuals perhaps, but there was no perpetual to be had, because now without the knight to support any checks, the king could just run. So yeah, here we are talking about queen f2. It seems to be what the engine slightly prefers, but the king could also just run. You give up the knight, but with the check, the queen can support the pawn. And then the opponent just ran out of checks in the end, and Ellen played this very accurately, getting the queen back in tempo to prevent any mating threats, and then promoting. And this is where the game ended. So a very clean win. She was never in any trouble, and so as the rating favorite, she does the job expected of her. And this continues her record of kind of Roberts-esque record of not having any draws in the tournament so far. So that's 5 wins and 3 losses, with the losses coming to a GM and 2 IMs. So fairly understandable. And as we were saying before, 2 of those losses could easily have been 1.5 points if a couple things had gone slightly differently. But yeah, thank you very much for being here. That'll bring an end to our coverage for today. And as I said, we'll be back again tomorrow. We should be on a live board. Aktjet is on commentary duty, and so it'll be round 9, the penultimate round, and Ellen will be looking to climb up the leaderboard. Yes, I have been reminded that I owe you a chair spin. So I will do that now for you. Any suggestions on whom we should raid? Preferably a Lichess streamer if possible. There is your spin. Thank you very much, Ati and Mas and Paul. It's been a pleasure commentating for you. Or, I wouldn't say commentating, but more discussing the game with you. The analysis has been mostly provided by chat. And you guys did a very good job of predicting the moves, so give yourselves a pat on the back. Okay, so Cantana chess, I was looking at that as an option as well. So I will send you over there. Thank you once again for having been here, and I hope you have a very pleasant rest of your day, or whatever time of day it is for you. That's it. Next round begins same time as today, so 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time, which is 5:30 p.m. for me, which makes it, I guess, 10:30 a.m. Central European Time. Yeah, so see you then. Goodbye and take care.